Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to our
Waalaikumsalam.
listeners, guests, and also our panelists today, alhamdulillah. So, inshallah, today we've got a special guest, Brother Mustahsin, who is joining us today. And we'll discuss why he's joining us today, because this is one of his key areas of expertise on this particular subject area, although he probably hates me for saying that. but but alhamdulillah, he's come on and we're going to be having a discussion with himself and obviously all the brothers here. Obviously, we have Brother Yusuf as well. Salams, Brother Yusuf.
Waalaikumsalam.
How are you, bro?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good.
Alhamdulillah, good man, good. Abdulrahman, inshallah, hopefully he's joining us. He might struggle though, because unfortunately one of his kids is a bit ill. So please
Oh,
make
goodness.
dua for his child and family, inshallah. Hopefully nothing too serious. Jake's still a bit busy, so he still can't join us as yet. But hopefully, inshallah, in the future streams, he'll be coming back in. So what's the topic today? So the topic is today 10,000 gods. Can we know the truth? Can we ever know which one is true? So this is one of those various contentions that many atheists actually promote this particular contention, and they promote it from two angles. So one of the angles is basically saying, why should I believe in your particular God when there have been loads of gods in the past that have been rejected? And the another angle that they tend to present is, why believe in a creator anyway? Because there are so many different God claims out there that it inevitably means that it's all relative. Inevitably, it means it's all false. Or somebody might turn around and argue that it's impossible to ever know which one's true, because how could I go through all 10,000 God claims in my lifetime in order to try to verify which one is a true religion, or is truly from this creator or creators, if that's what people believe. So there's various arguments that are being presented, and some of the conclusions of those arguments are basically saying it's epistemically impossible. There's this massive information overload. The second, obviously, argument is to say, well, it must be all untrue. Yeah, because why there's so many claims. So we want to dive into this and we want to say, do we need to become like scholars and theologians on every aspect of every religion out there in order to be able to assess and outweigh which one's the correct one or not? So that's the topic today. Inshallah, in our beginning of our introduction, we'll have a quick discussion, lay out the sort of the arguments, the points of view, and then we'll open it up to any particular questions from the audience or comments or contentions that might come from the audience, inshallah. So that's just a short-ish introduction. Yusuf, I don't know if you've got any quick thoughts of yourself without going into the details, because we've got a series of questions that we can ask.
Yeah, so long story short, no.
No. Okay, inshallah. So I think the first question that I wanted to ask, and maybe actually I'm going to open it with so just really quickly as well, sorry. Mustasin, the reason why we brought him on is because Mustasin has produced various presentations, planning to do various workshops or maybe videos on this particular topic area. So, he's put a lot of effort, a lot of thought in terms of looking at how do we go from numerous claims of the divine to being able to filter it into something that's manageable. What are those particular filters? That's why we got very much on. But before I just dive into what are those particular filters, Yusuf, why should we be looking for a belief system in the first place? Because I think a lot of atheists out there, or agnostics, or general non-believers, are saying, "Well, why do I need to look for a God claim? Why do I need to even process any information out there?"
Yeah, so I'd probably just say that, if for whatever reason you neglect this and it happens to be important in the long run, you're going to regret that. And so you should at least be open to this as a possibility before completely writing it off. And obviously, this is where the particular objection that we're going to be talking about crops in. And they say, well, where do I start? And it's like, well, we can go through that, but there are methods and there are ways of being able to narrow this down. You know, it's like the example I always use is, you know, you come upon a crime scene and you're like, someone's been murdered, and then someone goes, oh no, we will never find out who the murderer was. There is over 8 billion people on the planet. It could be any one of them. And it's like, well, no. You don't begin by assuming everyone is a potential suspect. There's ways in categorizing things and writing whole groups of people off. And like, you know, or in the opposite way, you could look to see if there are any evidences that give rise to the suspicion of a particular guilty party in the case of the murderer, or any evidences that might make a particular religion shine out as being more likely to be the case than others. So yeah, it's not the case. It's simply because you have all of this information that you need to try to sift through, that you do need to go through absolutely every single thing. You can group them and write them off accordingly.
Yeah, so Mustassin, so what's your thoughts in terms of why should we be looking into belief claims in the first place? If you've got a non-Muslim basically who's agnostic, doesn't really care much about religion, and you're saying to him, well, you got to go through these rational filters, and he say, well, why should I bother anyway?
Yes, you see, initially this is obviously the stage, the transition from obviously deism to theism. So I'm sure obviously you guys have done a series on, you know, deism, like in terms of the reasons why it's preferred for there to be obviously like revelation. And I think some of the reasons that you could potentially mention, for example, are like, you know, the desire to, you know, worship. So, you know, human beings, we naturally have that, you know, that instinct within us to worship. And the question is, you know, since humans by our nature, we differ, we can't really come to this conclusion. Like the only one who could really satisfy that instinct and who can tell us how to worship is Allah. Because otherwise there's obviously going to be contradictions. Some people might worship the self, some people might worship, you know, money, some people might worship a statue. So how do we direct that worship? Now, because obviously like with doctors, for example, if it's something like physical, we have a physical problem, you know, you can use like doctors because they can direct that. But when it's something metaphysical, something spiritual, and only something spiritual can direct that worship instinct. So I'd say that's one reason definitely why, you know, revelation is a necessity, because that worship instinct needs to be directed. I think secondly as well, you know, the concept of like right and wrong. So, you know, again, going back to the point, you know, human beings by nature, we differ. So who judges what's right and wrong? Is it your desires? Is it society? Or is it Allah? And obviously you could obviously give other reasons, but I feel like the point about morality, it makes more sense to say that a creator exists and he sends revelation and he tells us what is right and wrong, because otherwise everything then does become like relative and, you know, subjective. But we do sense some sort of objective morality. And what directs that? How do we determine that? The source can only be grounded in a divine being.
Right. Yeah, no, and in terms of my particular thoughts on this particular question, I think what it is that whether you're an atheist, non-believer, believer in whatever religion, you're looking for some sort of worldview. You're looking for something that provides an understanding about the good life. So it's natural, inevitable that you're going to be looking for some sort of belief system. So belief system doesn't necessitate that it's some sort of religious belief system. You're going to be looking for a belief system or worldview. But I think from our discussion today, we are assuming that a creator exists. Yeah, we are assuming that, you know, there are good reasons and rational reasons to believe in a creator, and then from that, certain arguments follow. So one of those arguments, I think you mentioned, Mustassin, is that, you know, we are created with this desire to worship. Yeah, and so if we can sense that there's this nature, this human nature to want to worship, want to seek meaning and purpose, and we've already established that a creator exists, then it follows that the creator is the one, whether directly or indirectly, is the one that caused you to have that innate desire and that innate nature. Yeah. So therefore, if there's this innate nature to want to form this relationship with the creator, then it's natural, inevitable that we're going to ask the question, how do we do that? And so part of that question, part of solving that question and solving that problem of how to understand meaning, how to worship, you're going to naturally ask the question, is there some sort of communication from the creator? And obviously, as we know, there's many people who made claims to the divine. So moving on to that, so by looking at I think we mentioned it sort of anyway, but I just wanted to make this, emphasize this point, because some people are just going to turn around and say, look, you're calling for us to look for divine religious claims, but you're not just assuming that God exists. You're not putting the cart before the horse.
So with this though, it's like we obviously, especially with regards to these videos, we can't every time we do a video go through the whole process that we've already been through, because we're just all like we've done previous videos on, for example, stage 1 or stage 2 or other arguments for the existence of God. They took hours. Like if we've got to do that before we even get into this particular objection, then we're never going to get anywhere. So for the sake of brevity, if you want justification for those things, see the previous episodes. And with this, what we're doing is we're basically saying, okay, we're dealing with someone now who, for the sake of argument, is conceding that God exists. But now they have this obstacle and they say, okay, I'll admit there's a likeliness of there being a God. But how am I ever even going to get to the truth of the matter when there's so many religions? That's the type of individual that this particular stream is going to be dealing with. Someone who's willing to at least accept that. If they're not willing to accept that, there's no point going through this with them necessarily. You would have to go back to proving to them that a God exists, or getting them to at least concede that a God exists. If for whatever reason they still say, oh, I don't believe in a God, and I'm not going to bother looking into whether or not there is a God unless this objection is clarified. You say, okay, let's, for the sake of argument, say that there is a God. What would you do then?
Alexa, this is a reminder.
Alexa, stop. It's prayer time in 3 minutes. So, basically, you're just saying, okay, well, if this is an absolute obstacle, and you're not even going to bother looking into God unless this is addressed, then we'll par the question of whether or not God exists to the side for a moment and deal with this in particular, and then you can sort of open it up or go into it.
Okay, Alhamdulillah. Mustasin, you wanted to raise something on that?
No, I was just going to say what Yusuf says. Obviously, the entire discussion of today is premised on the point of, obviously, Allah exists, and He has sent revelation. Now, how do we know, and how can we assess what revelation that is? So obviously, it's good that we make that clear from the very beginning, and obviously, you can obviously refer to the other previous videos in regards to obviously the existence of Allah that you guys have already done.
Yeah, no, alhamdulillah. So the other thing the people might turn around, and I've seen some of the people in the audience say, "Oh, it's a really terrible argument that atheists might bring in terms of this." But I've been involved in debates, formal debates with atheists, and they have brought this as a contention. And one of the contentions they brought up is there are 4,000 God claims or 10,000, whatever it is. Therefore, it must be untrue because you are an atheist to everybody else's God claim. So why assume that yours is the correct one? So how do you address that? That there are just so many claims to the existence of God. I've even heard it with debates with Hamza Sultan. People have made that with him as well.
Yeah, I think this is a logical fallacy. Just because there are many religions, it doesn't mean all are false. Let's take, for example, there's conflicting views as to who did, for example, 9/11, for example. Just because there's so many views, is it X, Y, Z, doesn't mean there's no one true answer. Yusuf actually gave a good example. I remember when he said, let's say you have 1,000 fathers claiming to be the father of that one child. Just because there's 1,000 fathers or 1 million fathers claiming does not mean there's no father. Does not mean therefore there's no correct answer. And you can also extend this example to science. We have conflicting models in cosmology. You have the Big Bang steady state model. You have the oscillating model, and X, Y, Z, and all of them contradict to some extent at a fundamental level.
And it's a great example as well, because if you were to say, well, what is the right one out of them? You can't just simply point to the sheer number of them and say, but how did the universe come to be? Well, we've got this theory, we've got that theory, string theory, this theory, blah 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 blah, and then go, but there's just so many. I'm an atheist to like all of them, just as you as a proponent of string theory are an atheist to the other ones. Like that isn't like there could be genuine cases within each particular theory that should incline you to believing one more so than the other, and simply like the quantity of them is completely irrelevant.
Exactly.
It's
I mean,
completely
going by that logic, you might as well throw science in the bin and just say science is false. If you're going to say all religions are false, then you might as well, say science obviously is false.
Yeah, no, it's a good point.
It's Maghrib time now. Should we take a short break to pray?
We can
Maghrib?
do, yeah. So we were going to have. I think Abdulrahman's struggling to come at this time at the moment because I was going to get him to cover the stream while we pray Maghrib, but obviously he's.
That's right. We just do a little.
Yeah, I'm just looking for that little thing where it says we're praying
banners.
Maghrib.
You got to go to banners.
Yeah, banners. Oh, there we go. Found it. There we go. So I'm going to drop everybody down, and then inshallah we'll come back. So just 5 minutes or so.
He's funny. He always cuts himself off.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, alhamdulillah. Well, I'm back anyway, mashallah. I think the other brothers probably doing the reciting Surah Al-Baqarah in Salah, alhamdulillah, mashallah. So they might come back shortly. So today's topic we're talking about is the topic that a lot of the atheists or various atheists or various non-Muslims generally bring up, which is a question related to there's so many gods out there, therefore they all must be false. And I think we've addressed that particular question. Both brother Mustasin and also Yusuf mentioned the point, which is to say that look, just because there's competing theories out there doesn't mean that therefore all theories are incorrect. And they gave various examples within science how there's different competing theories about the origins of the cosmos, but that doesn't mean therefore there is no quote unquote origin of the cosmos, where that's oscillating, eternal universe, steady state model, etc. So we've addressed that particular point. And so we're moving on to talking about, further in terms of how can we know. So, brothers, assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair for coming back.
Wa alaikum salam. Take off the banner, bro.
Oh, the banner, yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's a bit of an echo coming or feedback coming through from Mustasin. Have you got some headphones, bro?
Yeah, I do have headphones. Just give me a minute. One sec.
No problem.
It's the mute. Yeah, there.
Have you muted him? Oh,
I
you
didn't
muted
mute him.
himself. Okay, cool. So that's the topic today that we're talking about. There will be opportunity, inshallah, for people to ring in. I don't know what do you actually. How do you say it? Join the stream.
Yeah, join the stream.
Yeah, ring in, ask your questions, comment. I'm trying to sound not like a boomer. The funniest thing last week, though, Yusuf, I accidentally kicked myself out of the stream.
You kind of did that on your way out of the Maghrib prayer as well. Or you're like, oh, yeah, and then cut yourself off.
The trigger finger. Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah, we can hear you. We can't see you though.
Yeah, no,
it's good.
That's some high quality.
Is it high quality? Yeah,
high quality audio there, bro.
That's it.
That's a gamer's one.
One sec.
That's when Mustafa is playing Call of Duty.
I stopped playing that, man.
Right. Okay. So, quick question then.
One sec. Now we've got a different problem. Now he's breathing into the mic. Move the mic away from your nose a little bit.
It's fine.
Yeah, there you go.
Is that all right there?
Yeah.
So I don't know if we've answered this particular question, but maybe we have actually. I think Yusuf, you sort of explained it. We have so many religions out there. Is it basically epistemic overload? Are we inevitably in a situation that we can never know because there's so many God claims, so many religious claims? And we're not just talking about now, we're talking about for the last human existence, there's been so many different God claims. So how could we know which one's true?
Yeah, so some people do just get overwhelmed by it. And they just look and they don't know how on earth they're going to be able to sift through all of that information. But it doesn't mean there isn't ways of doing it. So you could just say, all right, what kind of different religions are there? So you've got monotheism, deism, polytheism, Trinitarianism, so on and so forth. And you could look into these groups or ask questions about these particular groups and ask whether or not the group is itself something that makes sense. And maybe if you come to the conclusion, for example, that you're not like contingent things are not worthy of worship. So things that begin are not worthy of worship. Then you're not going to have to take polytheistic religions seriously, especially if those polytheistic religions entail things like worshipping gods that were born. So if that becomes something, you can write polytheism off completely. If you look into like Trinitarianism and you don't find that to be rational, then you can write out, all the different forms of Christianity, for example. And if long story short, for whatever reason, you're left with monotheism, there's not that many monotheistic religions left as contenders. You've got like a few, and it's just a case of, okay, Do I need to look into every single one of these now? Well, not even then. Like, you could look at some of you could maybe begin with the most, the larger ones. It's not a necessity for their truth. So you wouldn't just jump into it based on the fact that they have the most followers. But it would be a good place to start. Okay, what kind of claims are they making? Do these claims make sense to me? And if they do make sense to you, and the propositions they're putting forward seem rational and they have evidences for them, then at that point, if you become convinced of it, it can be justified to accept that particular religion.
See, what I've noticed, Yusuf, is, and I've seen this with a lot of converts to Islam, is, they might not necessarily have the way of articulating in a very explicit way in terms of why they became Muslim. But I think there's a process of a form of abduction, filtering process. They get convinced upon a God claim, and there might be, good rational reasons why they believe in a creator. And so, as we said at the beginning, then they'll be looking for, okay, there are lots of people claiming divine. So they've got to go through a process of investigation to a certain extent. And then they come across sort of Islam and the various, implicit filters, as you sort of mentioned. They sort of go through that and see that Islam is sort of like, from an abductive perspective, fits as the best explanation of what they would see as a God claim. Yeah. I don't know if that's the case, Yusuf.
Yeah, definitely. Like, because what you're saying is that, okay, if there is a religion, what would I expect? Well, I'd expect there to be some sort of clear book, for example. Maybe you don't, but there's like, each person's going to put forward the type of things that maybe they would be saying that they would expect, and then they could go out and look there for those expectations. With regards to monotheism, for example, you might think, okay, well, if monotheism is the one that makes sense, there's going to be a clear emphasis on monotheism. And so you would then look into these things. Maybe, for example, like another thing for me was a case of trying to determine between the three religions, in particular, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. One of the things that helped me pick Islam as well was the notion of Jesus, alayhi salam. He struck me as a character that did exist. I just could not get behind the idea that he was a god at all. And even reading the Bible, like, you only really get that sense in one of the 4 books. I think it's the last one. Is it John?
Yeah.
Like, all of these like extra strange propositions about Jesus being one with the Father, etc. They're all in there, and then none of them are in the books that come prior to that. You've got just this repetition in all of the other books of this notion of Jesus being someone who worships God, being a man. And like, that to me just made a lot more sense. And when you take Jesus as being a man, things in the Bible seem to fall into place a lot more than this sort of forcing a Trinitarian idea upon it. So I couldn't accept Trinitarianism for that, one of those reasons. And then looking at Judaism, it's okay, well, if Jesus is someone who is pushing the worship of the one true God, and that no one is worthy of worship except the Father, and he's saying all of these things, which I find to be quite monotheistic. Well, what do the Jews say about him? Oh, well, they're saying he's in hell. They're saying that his mother's in hell. They're said to be they're supposed to have been a light to the earth, a guidance for all nations. But do you see them calling people to the worship of that one true God? Do you see them engaging in any missionary work? Do you see them doing that which you would think they would be obligated to do, to bring people who are not worshipping the one true God to worship that one true God? You don't see that at all. In fact, in many cases, you might even see them do anti-dawah. Until someone's interested in becoming a Jew, they might tell you, "Oh, you don't need to. Don't worry about it. It's fine. You just follow the Noahide laws and keep to yourself." And you can look at these things and say, "Okay, well, this just doesn't fall in line with me." And then you're looking at, say, Islam, and it's what does Islam say about Isa alayhi salam or Jesus? It's saying he's a man, that he worshipped one God, and the message that he's bringing within the Islamic picture is consistent with the message that all the previous prophets brought, to the degree that Jews are allowed to pray in mosques, but they're not allowed to pray in churches. And there's plenty of examples. Like there's a Jewish brother that we were speaking to on my channel. His channel is called Blessed is Hashem. To the degree that he even says that he has no problem saying Allahu Akbar. Like he says it, and he doesn't feel any guilt or shame when he expresses that statement, and he just says, "I'll repeat it over and over and over again," because he really does believe and consider. And this isn't just his opinion; he's getting this opinion from his rabbis. That the Muslims do worship the same God as the God of the Jews, and so when you're looking at it like this, the picture becomes quite clear, and you can at that point. Especially if someone's trying to say, "Oh, well, what about Thor?" So, well, Thor was born. I'm not interested in Thor. And if you're going to bring anything else that's something that was dependent upon something that came before it, something that had itself needs, this is, to me, isn't something worthy of worship. For me, it's just about getting to the greatest thing, that which is responsible for all of this, whatever is at the top of that hierarchy. That's the thing that's getting my worship. And so, what is it that's directing me towards that? For me, it was Islam.
Yeah, just wanted to few messages. So wa alaikum salam to Hamid Akhtar, who's joined us, gives salams, and also other people who've given salams. Wa alaikum salam. Also, Cavallo Rosso has mentioned this. I think he's probably having a conversation in the chat. But part of the discussion today is what Yusuf has mentioned. It's an abductive argument. To a certain extent that we're having for Islam.
It's strange to be saying that while I'm giving certain reasons why.
I know that's my point, but I liked it. but Mustad, before we go into, because we want to maybe break it down even more in terms of the actual criteria to filter out, because I think that's the point.
Yep.
We need to have rational filters to say, okay, yeah, there's 10,000 God claims, but have I got legitimate rational filters to filter out all the religions so that I have a manageable set of religions? I think Yusuf made the point earlier as well, is that you can group religions together. So if you've got polytheistic religions, monotheistic religions, or religions which depict God as a contingent being, you can group them into different classes like this. But Mustasim, before we go into that, the correct criteria, according to the research and the work that you've done on this subject area, what are, you would say, the incorrect? Because I think it's an important point, the incorrect criteria that can be used.
Right, just to obviously recap. So obviously what we've mentioned up to now is that just because there's many religions, therefore all are false. We've obviously refuted that claim. In terms of, and just another point as well, just before I answer your point, the question is when they say thousands of religions, what they actually mean by that, they don't mean 1,000 religions that exist today. They mean throughout history. So it's not necessary that there's actually 1,000 religions today, just to make that clear. And number two, when you actually see how they categorize religions, they include sects of Christianity as independent religions, and that's how they come up with a large figure. So they might include Protestants, Jehovah's Witness, Mormonism as a separate religion, or Ahmadism, or Shia, Sunni as separate religions. But if you categorize them under religion, i.e., Jehovah's Witness, Mormonism under Christianity, and you did Sunni Shia under Islam, then you actually narrow down the quantity of religions. So
I just because I can imagine some people in the audience, because you mentioned Ahmadis as well, and you categorize them. But you're saying from a non-Muslim point of view. You're not talking about from a Muslim point of view, because obviously
no, of course, no, definitely not. Yeah, that's good.
So obviously, once you've got the umbrella, where that, let's say a person has the umbrella of Christianity that he thinks is rationally true, then he then has to make a decision within that umbrella of which particular sects. The same thing with regards to Islam and Muslim. If he's got the umbrella, Islam seems to fit within the rational criteria to investigate. So not even say it's true, to investigate.
Exactly.
Then he might go further and investigate which particular sect would be the correct one. Yeah. So,
yes.
Just so that the audience not going to flip out.
Yeah. No, definitely. Exactly for clarifying. Let's get to the point. So obviously, in terms of the rational filters, I think Yusuf obviously explained.
The incorrect ones. I want to know what the incorrect ones could be, because there's a lot of people that will use incorrect arguments. For example, history. People often use history as a way to justify. Maybe they would say, well, I cannot accept, for example, I've heard this. Some Christians will say, I cannot accept Islam to be true because they deny the crucifixion of Jesus. Therefore, it must be
Right.
false.
Yeah, no, okay. So I just wanted to firstly, before I answer that question, just to clarify, the concept of like rational like filters. So obviously, a rational filter in essence is just like we filter out many religions. So let's take, for example, YouTube. If you're looking for a very specific video out of thousands of videos, you might filter it, by like type, upload date, duration, ratings, and obviously the more filters, in essence, the more filters you apply, you start to like narrow down the options. Or even like say marriage, for example, if you're looking for a partner, you might filter it by religion, race, maybe location. And again, the more filters you start applying, that's how you narrow down between like thousands of options. Obviously, another point just to mention, if the foundations of a religion are flawed, then Imam Razi actually mentions this. So if the foundations of a religion are flawed, the details on top are unnecessary. So if we have a religious scripture that says 1 + 1 is 3, we could actually dismiss that from the surface, from the foundational level, because and we won't need to investigate obviously any like details. Coming on to obviously questions. So you said, what did you say about the terms of the criterias? What
The incorrect ones. What are
incorrect?
the incorrect ones? Yeah. And I gave the
Well,
example of the Christians who will claim that Islam can be discounted because history says that Jesus was crucified, and it's Muslims don't believe
yeah.
that.
So the thing is, we have obviously different types of criteria. So we have necessary criteria, and then we have possible criteria. So possible criteria, in essence, is basically where you're imposing your religion onto God, i.e., God should say this. So let's say, for example, possible criteria might be for a religion to be true, it must say pray 5 times a day. That's obviously circular reasoning because it doesn't have to be 5. It could be 4, 3. It doesn't even have to be. You don't have. Maybe it might be like God could inspire a religion to not to pray, for example, or for example, the religion must say, there must be, I don't know, scientific miracles or in the text. It doesn't have to be the case. So possible criteria, obviously, where it doesn't have to be the case. And obviously, we wouldn't use them criterias. We would obviously use necessary criteria. Obviously, a necessary criteria is what the religion, for the religion to be from God, it must have this criteria. But with possible criteria, where it doesn't have to be, we wouldn't use such criteria when it comes to proving Islam.
Yeah. So I think
Only
maybe
what has to be.
yeah. So, and I think also the other point is this: is that with an incorrect criteria that people sometimes use, because the point here is this: is the criteria that you're using to filter out should be of quite a high bar. Yeah, because you're trying to filter, you're not trying to necessarily determine which one's the truth, even though it can help form you to understand what the truth is. So the point here is this: is that if historians have said X about something that occurred 2,000,
Okay.
3,000 years ago, yeah, the epistemic level of that conclusion, historical event, is never going to be 100%. Yeah, they're
Of course.
reconstructing the past based upon the available data, and the available data will always be at a certain level incomplete. Yeah, and so therefore, for example, there are claims within um, within other religions, like for example, as an example, Christianity talks about, and the Bible talks about the Exodus of Moses, and it talks about there being 1 or 2 million people that left Egypt. Now, for me, I wouldn't use that as a criteria to dismiss Christianity and the Bible to be untrue necessarily, just because history does not record the fact that 1 million plus or 2 million plus, although it's implausible or highly implausible, it doesn't necessarily mean it's impossible for that to
Exactly.
have occurred. Yeah, so I wouldn't use that. And in the same way, I think other people they use other criteria as well. For example, maybe bring Yusuf in. Like for example, they might use moral arguments, like, "Oh, you believe in X, therefore Islam must be untrue." You believe that this particular act is morally good, whereas we believe it's morally bad now. Like maybe the Hudud laws, you know. things like that. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts in regards to that particular type of argument. Oh, by the way, just giving also give salams and jazakallah khair to Muhammad Jasimuddin for the super sticker. Jazakallah khair.
So, do you want me to go into why ethical responses aren't necessarily refutatory?
Briefly, yeah, briefly.
Make it, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, basically, a lot of the time, especially when you're dealing with lay people, it is rooted in the intuition. Like they just sort of say, I don't like that. It's like, well, that's like not a good reason to reject something. Because the traditionalist says a similar thing sometimes when it comes to certain principles. The layman believer, be that an older Irish woman, for example, who's a Catholic, or a traditional Pakistani uncle from the subcontinent. When they're looking at certain things, they go, no, I don't like this, or this is something that where I'm from, we don't like this. You're not going to accept that as a genuine refutation off the thing that they are rejecting here, because you're just basing it off a particular intuition. So you need to give reasons, because this is the whole point of being rational, isn't it? Like, why is it that this particular thing is good or evil? Like, what principles do you uphold or abide to in order to then apply it to any particular example or practical situation, and then use these principles or this methodology to then evaluate this and say, oh, this is good or bad. Most people are not doing that. Most people are just reacting, and they're just saying, I don't like the sound of that. And that's just not that's not an argument. That's not a means to refute. So you'd have to, if you're going to make those kind of claims, there's a lot of legwork that has to go in. And some people do try to do that. Some people do have ethical positions that they have thought out. But as far as I find, for the most part, that's just not generally what happens.
Yeah. So, Mustafa, you're going to say?
No, nothing really much here, but it's just more the point is them criteria is obviously would be subjective criteria, obviously, and what we've mentioned is what the criteria is, which I'm going to mention after. Obviously, when we're using to judge what religion is true, we're using a necessary criteria, that i.e., if God is to inspire a way of life, then it must have the following. So we need to stick to is the necessary criteria. Now, what are the necessary criteria? I mean, I can go into.
Yeah, we'll get onto that one.
Yeah,
So then might as well ask that question. What's the first criteria for a correct religion?
Right. Firstly, I would say a religion, to be true or inspired by God, it must have a belief in God to begin with, and obviously that makes sense, because we get this idea, and I hear this a lot by atheists, that everyone claims their way is right. That's actually not necessarily the case, and not every religion has God like as a central aspect of their religion, or even the idea of God. It might be something more private. So let's take, for example, Buddhism, Shintoism, Confucianism, Taoism. A lot of these ancient Chinese religions don't have a belief in God in their religion. Whether they believe in God is separate, but within their text, they don't actually have a belief in God. God's not a central aspect to that religion. So by using the principle necessary criteria number one, that a religion to be inspired by God, it should have a belief in God, we've already then filtered out a lot of these religions that are atheistic, you could say. That's the first one. Second one,
before we go into the second one, so I think obviously, just to reiterate the point, this assumes that we've rationally proven the existence of God, or that we have rational, reasonable reasons why believe in a creator in the first place. And so therefore, what we're looking for is some sort of communication from the creator in order to satisfy this desire in human beings to worship. So we're looking for that. So now somebody's saying this is the guidance to follow, but it doesn't even form that relationship with the creator.
Exactly.
Then it's like, well, no, that doesn't seem to be what I'm looking for. What is the nature of human being? Yusuf, go on.
Or they can even say all paths are true paths.
Yes.
You hear that as well sometimes.
We'll get onto that as well.
And but that is linked to this. So where they're saying, just reiterating the point that you made, that some are not even claiming to have guidance by God or anything like that, and some are making claims about maybe having a guidance, but that every other guidance is true as well, and it's making this claim despite the fact that the things that it's pointing towards might contradict or deny the very religion that they're affirming. So that could obviously, if you're going to move into that, I don't know, is that a separate
Well,
section?
that was my second. So yeah, initially, the first criteria would be obviously to believe in a
Okay.
to have a belief in
As
God. And
anticipated.
second one is that it should claim. So like you said, it should claim to be from God. And the reason why is because imagine like God's inspiring a book, but he's not claiming it. So how would we know ever that it's inspired by God? I would say that's a necessary criteria. And even just the claim that their religion is divine, only a few religions actually make that claim. Not every religion claims to be divine, only a very few. So again, if we applied that filter number 2, then we've already filtered more religions out. And the final one I was going to mention here, well, actually a few
Before
more.
we, so before we,
Yeah,
I wanted to
comment.
also
Yeah,
ask the other
be comment.
point as well, which was that because it's not just about God claim, is it? It's about one God claim. The religion should be monotheistic, not polytheistic.
Yep.
Is that
Which
right?
we'll
Yeah.
get. Yeah, that's in my thing. But what I'm doing, I'm making it more from a natural flow. But obviously, yeah, actually,
Okay.
that would go second. Actually, that it should have a belief in one God. But
Yeah.
also, what Yusuf mentioned, which is very important, it should claim to be not just should it claim to be from God, but it should claim to be the only truth from God. Why? Because every religion pretty much contradicts each other at a fundamental level, like from a theological level. So one religion might say one God, another says three. So if it doesn't claim to, if it says all religions are right, that means it's contradictory, right?
Okay, so let me understand this then. So there could be a situation that God revealed multiple religions to different people.
Yep.
Yeah. Maybe in the past, isn't it? Different prophets
Okay.
sent to different people because they didn't meet each other. So wouldn't that refute that point?
No, but the essence, i.e., the basic theology must remain consistent because God can't transition from being one God to two gods to three gods. Laws can obviously change throughout time, obviously because circumstances change, but actually, the actual basic theology, the nature of Allah does not change.
So,
Like
so
God
maybe an
doesn't go
example.
from being
Yeah.
perfect to imperfect, for example.
Yeah.
God doesn't like say he's perfect in 1 year, and then the next 100 years he becomes like imperfect,
Right.
or he
So
changes
what you?
gods to two.
Yeah. So in essence, basically, in a practical, pragmatic sense, yeah, when we look
Yes,
at religions today, there are obviously going to be differences that exist on the fundamental level. Yeah. So there may be differences in God claims. As an example, some religions believe in multiple gods. So obviously, you're going to have a situation where if they're saying, well, you can believe in multiple gods and every religion is true, one, I
exactly.
can filter out the fact that actually I think rationally only one God can exist. And secondly, is well, how can that be true? And it claiming to also say that monotheistic beliefs are also true. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because there seems to be an apparent contradiction here, unless they do some weird, you know, Confucian style maneuver. I
Pretty
don't know
much.
what they call it. Yeah, pincer
Mm.
movement going on there. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
No,
some
definitely.
weird stuff going on. So then really you can dismiss that because it would have to say. And similarly, there may be even multiple religions that claim one God, but they contradict in other areas. For example, Muslims, we believe that the Prophet, peace be upon him, is the final prophet. Sikhs will claim that they believe in one God, but they believe in prophets after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So both
Exactly.
things cannot be true. Sikhs actually believe the Prophet, peace be upon him, was a true prophet, yeah, as
Yep.
well. So both cannot be true. Only one can be true, yeah.
Mm.
So something can't Sikhism or whatever it is, whatever religion in the future says, oh, all religions are true or have are true, and you can follow whatever you want. Well, that would be wrong because you've got a contradiction in regards to that, and I think that's a really important point.
Exactly.
So the point, the issue for the audience is that you can eliminate a numerous number of religions just based on that
Three
point, which
filters.
is that if they claim that they're not exclusively true, currently in this day and age, that all have truths, then there's a problem there because there
Mm.
are contradictions between the claims.
And there's
Yeah,
actually another point just to mention. So we mentioned like about good one, two, about 3 points there. The fourth point to mention. So we said obviously it should have a belief in God. It should
yeah,
obviously claim to be from God. It should be claimed to be the only truth from God, and
yeah,
obviously it should be monotheistic. But
yeah,
also it should have a perfect conception of God. So I.e. like a concept of God that has no weakness, no limitation, no deficiencies. Like, for example, we read, in certain religions where, God's wrestling and he's losing a wrestling match, or he's getting tired, refreshing, he's losing. That obviously, by definition, God is perfect. But if you're having religions that are saying God is not perfect, that's attributing, personifying God. I would say that's also
as a
another filter,
contingent being,
being a dependent being. Like, you have in other religions, like in Hinduism, where God is, he requires to be fed, or God's overpowering the other God, so one's dependent on the other. So I think that's also a necessary criteria to have, that a religion to be from God, it must have a perfect conception of God based upon what we already know from rationally what God is.
Yeah. Again, like I said, this assumes that we've had rational, reasonable reasons to believe in one creator, and then from that, we're then narrowing it down. Yeah. So even if you, as an atheist, you might say, "Oh, I don't believe God exists," you can understand now. Hopefully, you can understand at the very least that if that hurdle is overcome, the obstacle in that person's mind's overcome, they believe now there is one God, you can now filter out all these 10,000 God claims in order to come to one God claim. Okay, so what about so you got 4 criteria that you've laid down there. What about the 5th one, in terms of, I think you mentioned about preservation of the text?
Yeah, so the first obviously category was necessary criteria in regards to just Allah, like we mentioned. A second one would be like the second category, I'd say preservation. Like, for a religion to be from God, the text must be preserved. And the reason for this, which I'll ask Yusuf as well, because how would we distinguish between what is from God and what is from man? Essentially, if, like, for example, God's right. If 45% is from God, and the remaining is from human beings, you know what I mean? How are we going to know what's from God, what's from man? I think that preservation definitely is essential criteria, for it's a necessity for a religion to be from God. Maybe Yusuf, you can expand on why you think that's the case as well.
You
muted, Yusuf. Well, I can't hear you.
No, I was muted.
Okay,
the preservation is important, I think, because if people are adding to it and changing it, at that point it becomes difficult to be able to determine what is from God and what isn't. So, the Bible being an example of that, it's pretty much undeniable at this point that changes have been made. If you look at the new King James translation, there's verses, I think, missing from that were in the original King James, because things were being added and stuff like that. And obviously that is problematic, because at that point, if you can't really determine what is wahi or what is revelation, you could be basing many propositions about your religion on something that is a lie, or is just not about God at all.
Yeah, that's interesting, because actually what's quite interesting is, with the Gospel of Mark, the ending of Mark 16, chapter 16, that ending, Christians throughout hundreds of years were reading that as though it was inspired. And then when recent manuscripts came out that were discovered, they realized that was an insertion, that was a forgery that was added later. But all that time, Christians for thousands of years were reading that as though it was inspired.
Yeah. And obviously that is problematic. There's other things as well. So it's not just preservation, like the lack of contradictions, which sort of alluded to in the previous points as well. And for me, like one of my major experiences of reading the Quran was just this consistent sense of wisdom when reading it. So it's all of these injunctions and these things. I was asking myself, if I applied these in my life, would that might make my life worse or better? So if I gave up, if I abstained from things like alcohol, zina, pornography, XYZ, whatever it was, interest, is my life going to be better or worse? And the answer to this was a wholesale. It would be much better. And not just that, but for the people that were around me, growing up in a council estate in North England, these things that are being forbidden within Islam were causing huge problems throughout the entirety of I would say even the West, not even just the UK, but people where we grew up didn't really have present fathers a lot. That was a very rare thing. Most people had single parent mothers, who, fathers were either in prison, addicted to something, not present, off somewhere else, unknown, etc., etc. And so, you can, especially if you're going through the negative consequences of a society that allows these things to take place or to happen, you can start to see the wisdom, I think, in restricting the use of these type of things. So that's, I would say, another thing, like the wisdom in the book, reading it, having an experience with that as being wise, and then the consistency. So, for example, people try to say or claim sometimes that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ wrote the Quran, or but there's a huge distinction. They did a test on this as well between the Hadith and the Quran, or the verses of the Quran, and they seem to both have one author. So the Hadith have a consistency throughout them, and they talk in a very certain way. They use very certain language, and the Quran has a very consistent way of communicating, and it talks in a particular way, uses certain language, and that you can identify them as being like two different authors. So a bunch of these things in conjunction together, and then there's the interesting things of like the predictions that it makes. There's a really good channel from a mutual friend of ours, Many Prophets, One Message. It's just a plethora of really, really good videos that go into detail about a lot of these things. And like, for example, historical miracles. So there's one where like people claim, oh, the Quran just copied from the Bible. The Quran just copied from the Bible. Well, if that's the case, it would have copied its mistakes as well. But the Quran is very selective in terms of which stories that it brings into the Quran that you can find present in the Bible. And when it does that, it does it in such a way that it removes mistakes that weren't even really known as mistakes. So you had the example of the king that Yusuf alayhi salam, I think, was sold to. So in the Quran, he's not referred to as a pharaoh, but if you look at the Bible, the same word for the pharaoh of that was at the time of Musa alayhi salam is being used for the king or the ruler of the time of Yusuf alayhi salam as well. And the Quran specifically uses different words for both of these characters, and the Bible doesn't. The Bible uses the same one. And there's obviously recent findings and things like that. Go check out the video on Many Prophets, One Message. But recent findings show that the Quran's use of a different word here was more accurate and true to history than, say, the Bible was. But, it raises questions. Where did this knowledge come from exactly?
So just really quickly, just to recap, because I want to address this question as well, by the way, that Ehsan, I was going to call him Brother Ehsan then. So Ehsan's raised, yeah. But before, just I think it's an obvious point, which is that something has to be preserved, but there has to be a way of knowing how it's preserved as well, because I think there's very few religions out there that would claim that their religion is not preserved. But there's very, very few that can demonstrate how it's preserved. Yeah. So, Mustas, you going to say?
Well, just 2 points actually. Obviously, the Quran is actually the only book on the planet that actually makes the claim that it will be preserved in future tense, and then obviously we can demonstrate, like you said, it has in fact been preserved in 4 ways: by the text, the ancient manuscripts that we've discovered, by the Arabic language, i.e., in meaning, preserved in meaning, and preserved by memorization, and even tajweed, which is quite important in terms of how the words are pronounced. But yeah, you can carry on.
No, that's a really important point, because when we talk about preservation, I think people don't really appreciate what we mean by preservation here. And I think that's you, mashallah, you really made it a good point, because we're talking about preservation in text, i.e., the actual wording that's being used, preservation in meaning, which means you have to preserve the language as it was spoken at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Yeah, because obviously, as we know, language evolves, and language is based upon convention. So as the conventions of language changes, so does the meaning. And I give the example of, 100 years ago, if you read a literature and it said Stephen was gay, then it's talking about how Stephen was very happy. Yeah. I didn't. Although I didn't mean Stephen, any particular Stephen.
All the Steves in the chat, like,
He's
hey,
in the chat.
Yeah. But obviously, back now, if we read it in 21st century understanding, then obviously that has a very different connotation
Right.
when read. So not only the Arabs or the Muslims, early Muslims, not only did they preserve the text, but they also preserved the language. So that's why we have books of grammar, books of morphology, books of balagha, which is rhetoric, books of which also relates to idioms. All of these things, these phraseologies, were preserved in order to preserve the meaning. Dictionaries at the time, in terms of preserving what the meanings was, but like I said, not just the dictionary, but also the idioms, the phraseologies, the grammatical forms as well. So that's the second aspect. The third aspect that you mentioned was preservation in, what was the third one that you mentioned? Sorry.
Tajweed.
So tajweed, and there's another one as well.
Language, text memorization.
Oh, memorization. So that the actual verses themselves of the text, whether that's from hadith or from the Quran, but particularly the Quran, is it was memorized as well, as not just that we have manuscript evidence, but also to demonstrate that there's a transmission through the text, written text, but also transmission through oral memorization. Yeah. From generation to generation, and the fourth aspect that you mentioned, which was tajweed, which is again, it shows you how important they saw the preservation of the text, of the religious text, which was preservation of even how to pronounce the letters and the words of those particular texts, because again, that can evolve over time. So
and just the fifth point, just to mention that this tajweed and this preservation that is universally agreed upon by all the Muslims. So the way we pronounce the Quran, if you look across the Muslim globe, they recite it exactly the same way, not just the words, but even the how.
Yeah.
And they all agree upon it. The content, from chapter 1 to chapter
anyone
14.
who has to try to learn tajweed as well is going to know how frustrating it can be, where like your Quran teacher is like reining in. Like I'm still going over Surah Fatiha. I've been doing it for ages, and like I feel like I'm saying it right, and he says something, and I repeat it, and to me it sounds like we're saying the same thing, and he's like, no, there's a difference. And you notice as well, because as you do manage to get a hang of certain ways of saying certain Arabic phrases, you start to notice it in other people. So although you might not notice your own mistakes yet because it's still not registered, where you have learned how to correct your mistakes, and you know, okay, I used to do it like this and now I'm supposed to do it like this.
Yeah.
When you hear other people doing it, you're acute to it, and then if you try to correct them, they can't hear it. They feel like they're saying the same thing. It's like no. So then you've got this evidence then of like the strictness by which this is preserved, to the point where like how long you say something, when you should stop, or where your tongue should be exactly when you're saying. I still can't do it properly, but you know the door. I'm gonna say it right. Door. Like you've got to be very careful that your tongue isn't in the same place as it is when you're saying dal.
Basically,
and there's all these like mad subtle differences, but they took it really seriously and like to so much detail.
Well, just to mention, because if you were to slip a certain word, the meaning would change.
Yeah.
That's the point of it. Yeah.
But so
before you say anything else, I'm gonna get off because I need to pedal home and I need to get ready for bed and sort everything out. But sorry to have to.
Take care, Inshallah. Inshallah, we're gonna have Abdulrahman, hopefully.
Oh, is he coming on?
Hopefully, he got the timings mixed up, so that's the reason why. So inshallah, he should be coming on. But Jazakallah khair, Yusuf.
Jazakallah khair, Yusuf, as well.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Cool. So it's just me and you, Mustasid.
That's it.
We're gonna have to call a guest as well.
Oh yeah, we need.
Right. So I want you to address this particular question because Hassan is an ex-Muslim, so he's not a Muslim. He's come on streams a few times, comes on other people's streams, and he said that look, that first criteria about God, you're just basically using the Islamic God to discount all other religions, except Islam because it's the Islamic God.
No, but the whole point is we've actually come to the conclusion of this concept of God through a rational process, independent of the text. So we're not using the Quran to say, therefore, God is a necessary being. The necessary being and all this comes from pure, abstract, reasoning, of like a logical process. So we're not using an Islamic concept. Rather, it's the rational concept of God, and Islam confirms that rational concept of God that we've obviously gone through. Obviously, it's not. This stream's not about going through that. We've obviously had previous, streams on that topic about how we can come to know. But if you watch the previous episodes about the necessary being, the Quran's not mentioned once. No, we're not mentioning the Quran there. We're literally logically, we're reasoning independent of the text, which I just said. So it's not like an Islamic definition of God. We're not using the Quran and then justify. It's not like a circular reasoning. We're using independently rational reason, from the cosmological to the contingency. They're not in the Quran.
Yeah.
So we're not using the Islamic. But like I said, rather it confirms the rational proofs. Just confirms. Or the Quran, sorry, confirms.
So there's a point, isn't it? Which is that there's something called natural theology. This idea that you can come to certain aspects of God claims or belief in God, certain rational conclusions. Like, for example, many theists out there, whether that's Muslims or others, believe you can rationally come to the conclusion that a creator exists. That's why you have people like Joshua Rasmussen, William Lane Craig. They all come to the conclusion that a creator exists. Now, for them, they say that natural theology doesn't get them to Trinitarianism; it just gets them to monotheism. Yeah, and then they have other arguments or other attempts to justify whatever Trinitarian beliefs. And we're saying, well, we're going from this point, which is a non-Muslim can come to a conclusion that one God exists, or one necessary being with a mind, or who intended to create exists, and then based on that, we're looking at something that fits that criteria of a necessary being. And obviously, a religion that claims that God was born, that God dies, that God can cease to exist, that there are multiple gods, etc. All of that would be discounted because it doesn't fit within our natural theology. So I think that's hopefully, inshallah, that's made it clear for you that it's not circular reasoning. The second point, also, I think he raised up, he said preservation is not an important criteria, but I think preservation is essential criteria, because if I'm looking for a religion, then I can't justify if it's preserved or not, then I can't justify whether there's human interference within the religion or not. That's the whole point. What you're trying to do with preservation is to say this is from God, this isn't from human beings. Yeah. And so there's no, even from a pragmatic point of view, the historical discussion around Islam being true, or the historical discussion about the preservation of Islam, we have a complete story. Yeah, we have a complete explanation. Whether somebody believes the explanation actually demonstrates its preservation is true or not is a separate point. The fact that we have a complete explanation, yeah, so we know that, okay, this is how it was revealed to the Prophet, peace be upon him. These were the scribes of the Prophet, peace be upon him. This is what happened during time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, after the Prophet, peace be upon him. This is his methodology, how he used it and how it was agreed upon by the companions. This is what happened during time of Umar radiallahu anh. This is what happened during time of Uthman radiallahu anh, how he recommissioned Zayd ibn Thabit to produce other master copies to be spread throughout the Islamic Khilafah. Yeah. And that any other which wasn't conformity to that or wasn't produced from the master copies were to be destroyed, so that everything came to that. Because we got a complete history, or complete explanation. Again, like I said, somebody might say, well, I don't think that actually occurred, but we have that. Now you take that and you give an example of like the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, where the author is unknown. Christians would readily admit this. The authorship of this particular book that's found in the New Testament is unknown. Or maybe some of the other Eastern religions where they cannot trace the religious scripture back to a particular date. Yeah. No matter about, how it was preserved, but there wasn't a particular date.
Then, like the Rig Veda, for example.
Yeah. So then there's a problem of saying, how can I have trust that this is divine? Or how can I therefore discount that any human intervention engaged within it? potentially. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's an important point. I think it's a criteria that's going to dismiss a lot of religions out there if people accept that particular criteria.
Yeah.
Mustafa, sorry, go on. You can say Mustafa.
Yeah, so if we apply these 6 criteria, I think there's probably 6 that we've discussed. If we use the 6 filters now, like I was giving the analogy about YouTube or whatever, you've now narrowed down only to literally a very few religions, pretty much. Or you could even
Yeah.
just say like Islam and whatever, Christianity maybe. But even that's obviously a separate topic. But the point I'm just trying to make here is we've discussed like 5 5 to 6 necessary principles, criterias, filters,
Yeah.
and we've obviously narrowed down the options.
Okay, so
we're left with a few.
another because we there are still some more criteria that we're
Of
looking
course,
at.
so that's the essence of what I'm trying to say. The more filters you apply, the more you narrow down the options.
Yeah, yeah. So you in the presentation that you produced, which inshallah, one day will get released. Yeah, and
Inshallah,
hopefully
yeah.
we're going to do a course on that as
Inshallah.
well. Is you actually mentioned something about evidence. So what evidence do we have, or what's this idea of evidence?
Okay, so this is another filter now. This is another criteria. So obviously, with evidence,
You got one criteria. So you got one general category about God. You got
Yep,
one general category about preservation, and then you've got another general category about
evidence.
evidential. Yeah,
Now, with evidence, we need to separate these points, whether the evidence is strong or not. That's separate to the point that is the evidence. So basically, Islam is the one of the only religions, I would say in Christianity and Islam, are the only religions that provide some sort of evidence or some sort of justification as to why the religion is true, why is it inspired by God, or why you must accept the book. Like the Quran hints about its linguistic miracle in Surah Baqarah when
well,
produce.
more than here, it makes it explicit. But go on, yeah.
Yeah, about the chapter, the Quran,
Yeah.
like it. It also hints at evidences for the prophethood of the Prophet, peace be upon him, like the fact that in Surah Ankabut, where Allah says, he couldn't read or write. Otherwise, the followers of the falsehood basically would have doubted. Allah is
Yeah.
using a rational proof why he's a prophet, or the fact that the prophet lived among you, his whole life. Do they not reflect in their companion? Allah is there using the Quran here, is using reasons or evidences to point to its truthfulness. Now, if I'm going to imagine this now, I'm looking at all these books of the world and I'm only seeing one book here is giving some sort of justification. Whether that justification is strong or not, separate. Which one would I rationally choose? A book that, okay, it's got some sort of evidence here. Let me check out the evidence, or a book that doesn't provide any evidence. I'd rather, it's worth researching a book that provides some sort of evidence so I can assess it, rather than looking at other books that don't have any sort of justification. Like if you look at certain books, they don't mention anything about why their religion is from God or why you must accept it. With the Quran, Allah gives you rational reasons, evidences, hints at evidences why it's from Allah, why you must accept it, why it's from the divine.
Yeah.
I think that's a very essential criteria, because a religion from God should not be based on blind faith. Because if it's based on blind faith, then how are we going to distinguish between all the religions? Rather, the religion should have some sort of evidence hinted in its text that we can, assess to come to the conclusion that it is indeed from the God and from Allah. And we see only Islam and Christianity in terms of the resurrection. They're the two religions that generally have some sort of evidence based in the text.
It sounds like an obvious point, but it's a point that a lot of people don't necessarily use in order to justify their own religion, which is evidence. Yeah, and evidence here is more than just personal feeling, because a lot of people will say, well, I had this feeling. Me and you had a conversation with some Mormons and they talk about testimony of faith. You remember?
Yeah, of
If
course.
you sincerely pray to their God, then you'll get this testimony, and therefore, but it's more than just feelings, because the problem is that feelings in and of themselves, lots of people use that as a sort of a justification. So it doesn't really make any one way or the other. But you're looking for an objective criteria as best as possible, and I think you mentioned there's two in essence, in the presentation that you produced. One is an internal evidence, and one is an external evidence. And internal evidence from you can correct me if I'm wrong, is what you're saying is that there's no internal contradictions. So one of the things that you would look at for a religious text to be true is you're not seeing clear cut. We're not talking about, things that could be open to interpretation, or it's true in this sense, but it could be true in another sense. But actually, clear cut contradictions. And if you have clear cut contradictions, that in and of itself would discount it. It doesn't again make it true, but it's a way of filtering out, and it gives greater credence to the possibility of its truth without being internally contradictory. And the second was external evidence. So the external evidence is to say, okay, have we now got, so in essence, what we're doing is we got these like negative criterias, to discount religions and maybe single out one or two. And then you've got evidences that now are positive criterias to make a case for one over the other. Yeah. And that positive criteria would be something which, as Muslims, we believe is what the prophets brought, or the messenger specifically brought, which was a miracle, or in Arabic we say mu'jiza, which means inimitable act. Yeah, something that cannot be always beyond human productive capacity. Yeah. So we believe that Moses had the staff that turned into a snake. Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, he was able to, by the permission of God, cure the sick. So these were evidences to justify that they were prophets, because they were able to bring something that was inimitable. Yeah. So again, the Quran mentions that it's inimitable, or the proof of prophethood of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the Quran, as one of the arguments for Islam, because the Quran is inimitable. Yeah, that's what the Muslims at least claim. So there is a claim for an external criteria in order to justify its truthfulness. Now, as you mentioned, lots of religions out there, how many make a claim for an external criteria? Yeah. So, if they don't make a claim, it's hard for me to assess. And if this one makes a claim, then that's the one that I'm going to start off with before anything else. Yeah.
Well, that's internally. So if the religion internally from the text itself claims it's from God and gives evidences, then that's worth examining, rather than a book that doesn't give evidences. Why you should accept it. Okay. Obviously, externally you can give reasons why you think the book's from God, but internally, if the scripture itself doesn't provide any evidence or reason itself, like the Quran provides reasons, like the challenge, for example, the prophethood, it hints that this is why Islam is true. But other religions, obviously, they don't have that hint. There's no direct internal evidence from the text that says this is why the religion is true, and here's the evidence.
Okay, so again, we've not gone into the actual details of why Islam is true in this, because that's not the discussion today. It's simply the discussion how you point out whether something could be worthy of consideration and investigation. So inshallah, in future, we are going to have streams where we're going to discuss, some of these points more in depth. Yeah. So just so we can move on, what are the other criterias that we use?
Yeah, just to quickly mention, in terms of obviously evidences for Islam, obviously this is not a stream for it, that's why we're not discussing, but just to give like an overview of what we have, I like to like structure things in my mind, so I like to categorize things. So we've got obviously the Quran. We start off with the Quran. So we have like the linguistic miracle, we have the numerical miracle, we have the historical miracle, we have the prophecies, the transformation aspect and preservation, and the falsification tests. That's 7. And then you go into the prophethood. That's a separate category. We have the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, for his proof of prophethood. That would be, for example, his truthfulness based upon seerah, based upon the process of deduction, elimination, that he was only truthful. His prophecies and his influence, his impact, and the fact that he's prophesied in previous scriptures. So you combine them two into one. These are our obviously evidences. Now, obviously, that's a separate discussion. We can go into linguistic aspects of the Quran. Its word placement, word choice, the rhetorical devices. The conciseness, multi-meaning. The word counts of the Quran, the historical miracle, the prophecies about, for example, Hajj, that people across the entire world would perform Hajj at a time when only local Arabs were performing Hajj, and so on and so on. But I just thought I'd just give that overview in terms of, these are like the evidences that we have.
Yeah.
So but in terms of your question, yeah, sorry.
I think, yeah, no, that's Hamza. I think that's answered the question. Inshallah, we will be hopefully pinning the what's the word, the link to join StreamYard. Yeah, I'm just having to try and work that one out.
Just to mention the last point,
Yeah.
you asked the question about further filters. So
Yeah,
obviously,
So Hamza, you mentioned a lot of important points in terms of actually what we mean by internal, external evidences for Islam that
right.
we have, yeah, or we look at. But yeah, what are the further filters as
So
well? What are some of the other ones?
so also for a religion to be from God, I would say it must be universal. So that would exclude a lot of the religions that don't exist today, for example, like those that have died out and those that are only for certain races. So obviously Islam is a universal religion for all human beings, despite race, background. But you have obviously certain religions out that claim only their race is can accept. You have to be a specific race to accept this religion. So I would definitely say universal is a criteria as well, and not just that, but propagation of that belief. Because if God's inspiring a religion for all humankind and he's not telling you to spread that word, then what kind of God is that? Like, does not God obviously want everyone to know the truth? And we see there's only very few missionary religions as well, and only very few universal religions. So when we apply them two filters, again, we start to narrow down options until we're left with Islam.
So just on that point about universality, because the whole point is that as human beings, I am looking for guidance. Yeah. So if whether I'm living in, whether I find it is a separate point, but I'm
Yep.
looking for it, whether I live in Timbuktu or whether I live in, the Middle East or wherever, yeah, or Alaska. I'm looking for guidance. I'm looking for a message. I'm looking for building a relationship with the Creator. Yeah. So how do I do that? I have to have some sort of. I have to be looking for something which is going to be universal,
Of
universally
course.
applicable. Yeah. So if it's just saying, well, God gave guidance for just this group of people and nobody else, I'll be like, that doesn't really make sense. That doesn't seem to be the reason why I've been created. I've been created with this desire for purpose, meaning, and worship, and yet I've been told that I don't need guidance to how to define my purpose, meaning, and worship. So it seems a bit
Exactly.
odd like that.
Yeah. And the
Yeah.
religions that obviously the past they no longer exist, them thousands of religions, they would be filtered out as well because they're not
Yeah.
applicable today.
Right.
So yeah, that's the essence of the point. So these are the criteria that we've spoken about, and when we apply all these criteria,
So
as I said,
there's a few other ones as well. I think there's one other one which is important to mention as well, which is comprehensiveness as well. Have you mentioned that one?
I've not mentioned that. That's something I have to really think about. Obviously, for a religion to be from God, in fact, I might as well ask you this question: like,
Go on.
why do you believe that a religion from God should be comprehensive? So why must it speak about economics or societal issues? Things like that. Like how obviously Islam is a comprehensive. It's not just limited to rituals. It's obviously comprehensive. But why would you say that would be a necessary criteria? I agree with that. I just want your reasons.
So I think from my perspective, I think what it is that again it goes back to this point about at the beginning, as human beings, we're looking for how to live the good life, yeah, how to live the correct life, how to live a meaningful life, and we don't just live as human beings. We're created as social creatures. Whether you believe we evolved in that way or we were created that way, the fact is we are social creatures. We are people who have to live in societies and we have to be able to form relationships with other human beings to get on. And those relationships we form with other people are going to impact upon myself as an individual. Yeah. So it's going to be natural that if I'm looking for guidance on how to live life, then I'm going to look for guidance on how to live life in a society, not just as an isolated individual. So, the economic relationships that I form with people are going to have major impact upon our life. And people can see that. Look at capitalist societies in the West, how big of an impact consumerism has on the individual and his likes and his desires and his wants, yeah, and even his feelings of happiness. So you're really thinking that, okay, some sort of religion is going to be global to encompass all aspects of a human being's life. It's not just going to say, here's how to pray and that's it. It's going to be, here's how to pray, here's how to form relationships with your parents, Yeah, here's the responsibility parents are meant to have to their children. Here's your responsibility to, communities, to the society at large, etc. Yeah. So I
Yeah,
think the comprehensiveness, again, is an important aspect.
because then obviously people would be contradicting themselves. How, one might say X should have this responsibility, and someone might say no, Y should have this responsibility, or they shouldn't have this responsibility.
Or you get this
Um,
weird situation where people are saying, I'm like Tony Blair, who was the Prime Minister of the UK, he became a Catholic, and he actually introduced, laws that made it easier for gambling companies to exist within the UK. And he even said, oh, I don't believe that that's good, morally wrong, but we live in a secular society. So there's a disconnect between what he believes as religious, values, and what
right,
he then
yeah.
implements in a secular sense. And you think, hold on, that secular sense, allowing more gambling to occur within society, deregulating it in a particular way, that's going to have an impact upon an individual. It's going to make it more any situation where people are more likely to gamble as opposed to not gamble and things like that. I think it was super casinos. I think it was that it
That's
was.
interesting. So you're
Yeah.
saying basically, in essence, there's conflict between what what the society is doing, and your belief.
If in a secular society,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. So
of
you
course.
would have a situation where you would want a harmony between an individual's belief in his relationship with the creator and how he conducts himself. And so you would have this sort of this religion or this divine guidance that's going to guide in both areas so that you're able to facilitate, or God is able to facilitate your path to salvation. Yeah.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense,
So
definitely.
I don't know if I've actually shared the stream or not. Yeah, so let me just double check.
Oh,
Pinned
that's a
this
question.
link. Oh, hold on. I think it has been pinned. Let me just check. Has it been pinned? Oh, sorry, just one sec. So I've got a phone call going on. Yeah, so I'm just checking. Oh, yeah, so the link has been pinned. Let me do the banner
We've
for
got people
that.
waiting.
We don't have anybody waiting at the moment, actually. So if you want to come
Okay.
on, and we can discuss that one.
Is Abdulrahman coming on?
Inshallah, he should be coming on. If not, we've got a
Hmm,
short show, which is great. We're
that's
more than
good.
happy.
Yeah.
Oh no, we've got your favorite guest on. Alhamdulillah. So I'll bring him on, inshallah. Link to join the stream has been pinned. There you go. Right. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, brother Abu Muhammad Ali.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. How you guys doing?
Alhamdulillah,
Alhamdulillah,
good
I'm
man. What
doing
about
great.
yourself?
Alhamdulillah, how's the family?
Alhamdulillah,
Alhamdulillah.
good.
It's been quite a while.
Alhamdulillah,
It
it's good
has
to hear from
indeed.
you.
MashaAllah. Sorry I came a little bit late. I didn't get the chance to watch all the stream. So I have a question pertaining to the criteria or the yardstick that Brother Muattasim mentioned. Does it include salvations? A true religion from God has to provide a means of salvation, either in this life or next life. Answer the critical, essential questions about this life as well, like why there's suffering, what happened when we die, where we come from. Does it include those? Did he mention anything in regard to those things?
No, I didn't mention about that. In terms of salvation aspect, or like the existential questions, that's a good point actually. Like, because obviously a religion from God, that's the point of it. Like, why are we here? It should address the purpose. But so I
I think
would say
we mentioned it at the beginning. We're talking about purpose, meaning.
yes, yeah. But I think every religion pretty much has some sort of makes their own purpose up.
Yeah, so I think the issue,
Salvation, I don't know. Like
yeah.
pretty much most religions.
So I think Abu Muhammad, we're presupposing a little bit in terms of salvation
Mm,
that that's what God wants, that there's some sort of paradise, etc., etc. It could be
yeah,
reincarnation. I'm talking
exactly.
about from a purely, non-Muslim. He doesn't come with any preconceived ideas or biases. and he looks at these claims for the existence of a creator, also the claims for revelation from the creator, and what would his filters be. Yeah, so we're trying to say as a bare minimum what that would be. And the idea of salvation, you could say to a certain extent it might be intuitive, but people might have different views about what it means to be saved, or maybe believe in this eternal reincarnation type model. Whereas what we're saying is that this particular criteria that we had, so the first criteria centered around God claim, that's first. Second one was around the preservation.
Yep.
Yeah. Third one was around evidence, internal and external evidence. And the fourth one, which we sort of touched upon, was this idea of universality and comprehensiveness as well. So
and
those are the
propagation as well.
Yeah, and propagation as well to a certain extent. Yeah. So those are the 4/5 key points areas within this. And the reason also I think it's a really important discussion to have is because, like I said, I've had many discussions with many non-Muslims, even recently on Hamza's Den as well as here, but on Hamza's Den in particular. When I discuss with them, I actually go through this process with them, with non-Muslims, because if they've agreed upon the existence of a creator, I say, okay, so what would you expect now? Would you expect that there would be some sort of communication? What would you expect of that communication? Would it, if it claims, because a lot of people who believe in God or agnostic to a certain extent about religions, the problem that they have is that they don't have, they feel that they're just overwhelmed by information of different religions, and it's just impossible to filter out any of those particular religions. And what you can demonstrate is actually you can filter it to one, and that only that one religion would be Islam. So really, you should be putting all your efforts investigating this one religion.
Bearing in mind as well, when you're filtering, you're not even refuting other religions. You're just filtering out. So just thought I mentioned that as well. You're not actually you don't need to even attack, refute, whatever any other religion.
You don't need evidence to demonstrate the other religion's faults.
Yeah, you don't need to do that.
You're just not assuming them to be true because they're not fitting your criteria.
Or not fitting the necessary criteria, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree with everything you guys mentioned. Jazakallah khairan. I'll keep up the good work.
Well, yeah.
Any other questions or points that you wanted to raise?
Yeah, some personal question for Mu'tasim. But I want to keep that for another time.
Not on here.
Next
right.
time,
inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
I can imagine those personal questions.
Exactly.
What they are. Yeah.
Is anyone else waiting?
Nobody else is waiting at the moment, so the opportunity is there. Hopefully we'll get Abdulrahman a bit. If not, we're going to end the stream, bro.
You message Abdulrahman, see where he is.
Yeah. No, inshallah. So hopefully you'll be here. There's a question that I wanted to, somebody sent a super chat. I did have it on here. I just want to go through it again because we never asked it. It was more related to a belief in creator, the evidence for it. So I'm just quickly scrolling up to see whether I can find that particular question again, inshallah. But like I was mentioning before, the reason, I think this is a really effective method and model for da'wah, and I'm speaking obviously to the Muslims here primarily, is that if you explain these rational filters, why we can, remove or negate certain religions without even investigating their particular claims, then you make a case for Islam, and you make it more easier for them to be able to come to investigate Islam as well,
Of course,
and what
exactly.
is true. I think it's a very powerful argument.
Isan says here something. I'm just scrolling up. It's rational because you already believe in it. No, I would say we believe in it because it's rational.
Look, Isan, look, at the end of the day, you're going to turn around and claim that it's not rational, and we're going to say it is rational. So it doesn't make it doesn't help in essence. just to say you're only saying it's rational because you believe in it.
The thing is that he wasn't able to say that with someone, let's say, who's a convert, for example, that's converted to Islam, like Yusuf. He wasn't able to use that against him because he didn't believe it at one point. So he used pure rationality. So what are you going to say to him?
Yeah, but he's like I said, it's just he believes in his claim. We'll investigate that. If we think his claim is nonsense, then that's the reality of it, because that's how we assess the arguments. Now if he thinks that we're nonsense, that's up to him. That's if he wants to believe that. So anyway, so Malik, Jazakallah khair for the super chat. He's asked the question: do you guys think that the uniformity of nature and the reliability of induction in regards to the generalizations about things is proof for God? What do you think to that?
This is stepping out my lane a bit. When he says reliability of induction here, what does he mean in terms of the method of induction?
Yeah, I think Malik probably means the reliability that induction can allow us to make certain generalizations, even though we got a limited set.
Yeah, the thing is we're not, when it comes to proofs of God, for example, we're not using just induction. We're using obviously deduction based on metaphysical like principles. So it's not like there's going to be more data in future. Proofs of God are obviously you can categorize them. So like deductive ones, like the contingency argument from the PSR, possible beings, limitation. That's all purely metaphysical, all based on principles. So that's definitely not using induction.
Yeah.
However, induction is more like secondary, I'd say, rather than primary. So like arguments for design, for example, you could use maybe that show that the likelihood, but that's not our primary argument. But is it reliable? I believe it can just be used something as secondary rather than something primary. Right? It strengthens about the existence of God.
Yeah, strengthens some of the premises of the argument,
but like also scientific ones as well. For example, the Big Bang.
Classically, the uniformity of nature argument was used to prove one God. Yeah, the oneness of God. So they may use other arguments, like, for example, the contingency argument or the Kalam cosmological argument, to say that there is a being out there, a creator, a necessary being, even. And then they would use this argument to say, well, look, the uniformity. So Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, he's written a book on this that I've translated at home, where it discusses oneness of God. And one of the arguments that it uses is from the uniformity of nature, saying because the laws of nature, not only do they operate the same throughout the whole of the universe, but also they are interrelated. Yeah. And so that implies, it's an evidentialist argument that implies that there must be one God for that. Yeah. I think we've got some, so hopefully, inshallah, that's helped to answer some of those points regards to that question.
We've got someone else waiting.
Yeah, we got
going to comment.
Brother Sam, assalamu alaikum. I think I remember him from last week's or last 2 weeks stream.
Walaikum salam. Yeah, I think you mentioned to him about we get morals from the Quran or any book, but I don't believe we do get many morals from the Quran. I think a lot of the morals here are like already, God's built inside of us. And what the Quran has, more kind of laws that God wants to, people to follow. So, even atheists here, they'll have morals, which may be similar to what, believers have. So, yeah, I don't think you could. I don't think having a kind of a book to say this way you get morals from here makes sense to kind of atheists.
Well, because you know it by intuition. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, it's built in. It's not human nature. We know what good and bad is.
Yeah. Okay. Let me give an example then. Is interest good or bad?
I guess it depends. Some people say it's good because you're getting, money.
There you go. So that's a practical question, because we live in a society that's full of interest, and they believe it's a very good thing.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is,
he's basically saying that your intuition can't rely on everything. So there's certain things out there that your intuition won't able to account for. So like riba, for example, you're not going to be able to know whether that's right or wrong. But
it's not. I mean, that is more like, I would say, it's more like a rule that God has put, and goes, in God's eyes, this is not allowed because you're profiting from your fellow.
what
human being.
about polygamy then?
The rule of riba
Yeah.
and interest is not just simply a rule, so they don't do it. There are consequences of that. There's a perception that this is an injustice that's
No, but-
created.
well,
So it's giving a moral verdict on these things. And so look, the certain schools of theological thought within Islam say that human beings can know what's right and wrong in a general sense, but in the specific sense, they need guidance and revelation. Like the
that's what I'm saying. There's
the
certain
Ashari
things.
schools say that human beings can't know what's right or wrong, even in a general sense. They may have intuitions, what they think, but there's no way of grounding those things to be true unless you've got revelatory authority to determine these things. So so I think the question, whether you want to call it this is a law or this is a morality, whatever it is, you want to make a distinction between the two. The fact is, there's a question about riba. Some people say it's good, some people say it's bad, some people say it's legal, some people say it should be illegal, and yet we need a way to solve this particular problem.
So if you follow the book, you're gonna abide by that. What I'm trying to say is more in terms of general. It's like, some people say, oh, atheists, where do you get morals from? It's like, you need a book. No, but in general living, you don't need a book to tell you what is right and wrong. Lying is wrong. Stealing is
Okay.
wrong. Murder is wrong. You don't need a book to tell you.
You think abortion is wrong?
Yeah, I think. Well, personally, yeah.
So a lot of atheists, a lot of people out there say no, it's not wrong.
On that, it's up to them to decide. Certain things, we decide ourselves. Is this morally wrong?
Yeah, but the problem is you have a debate about whether abortion is morally right or morally wrong. Some people say it's morally right to abort. Other people say it's morally wrong. Now you can say it's up to them, but that's the whole point. The point being it becomes relative. You have to live in a society.
Yeah, if I'm saying generally living, is lying wrong? We know it's inbuilt into us. That is wrong. We know stealing is wrong.
Let's say I'll give you an example now. If you're saying lying is wrong, let's say Nazis come to your house. You live in, Germany during World War II, and they say, "Do you have a Jew in your basement?" And you have a Jew in your basement. What do you do there? What's the moral thing to do?
Yeah, to lie.
Right. So you can't say lying is morally wrong, and that's
no. It is. In a certain situation, you can lie.
Right.
To save lives, you can't lie.
Which are those situations? This is a specification. This is the problem.
Well, this is it. If
this is where the debates occur within moral philosophy.
Yeah, but I'm saying even atheists will say, it's okay to lie in that situation.
But it's some Christians believe it's not okay to lie in that situation.
Well, that's the opinion, but
that's the point. The point is,
you don't get that in the book, are you? That's
you are going to get that in the book. In the Quran, in the Sunnah, that's what you get. You get exceptions to when it's allowed to lie. Yeah, you have that. We have these rulings within Islam or within a religion. Yeah, just like we have rulings related to riba, interest. We have rulings related to trade. We have rulings related to, how to engage with the opposite gender. We have rulings related to, what is the moral right thing to do when it comes to the issue of abortion and whether the mother's life is in the threat or not. Where the rulings are in that. So we have these rulings. It's not like we've just been left, and everybody can make it up from their own mind. Yeah.
Well,
so this is what it means to have comprehensive deen, comprehensive religion.
Imam Joani mentioned something interesting. It's slightly separate, but it can link to this point. He basically says that he compared a prophet to like a. Basically said, wait 1 second, hang on. Joani continued the debate by arguing that prophets had also been sent to specify what believers needed to do in order to conduct their lives righteously. He compared a prophet to a physician who was able to identify the precise cure. He made the use of analogy. So this is the analogy. You got a physician is needed to identify foods and medicines for people to distinguish them from deadly poisons, even though experience gained through trial and error could lead to the same information. The long period of time would cause irreparable injuries and losses. Meaning he's saying like, even if you, let's say, even if to assume what you were saying is true, it'll still be detrimental because you'd have to do a trial and error to see what's right and wrong. And why not just have revelation that makes it clear and prevents any catastrophe from occurring to begin with?
Well,
Yeah.
you see, when you say revelation, the revelation is for Muslim is the Quran.
And
I
the
don't
Sunnah.
Just
Well, this is why. How do you class Sunnah as a revelation?
That's a separate stream. We've had two
Well, this
streams
is
on
it. This
that.
is what I'm saying, isn't it? I don't believe
Well,
that.
no, hold on. It's not. This is it. The vast majority of Muslims throughout the whole of history have accepted Quran and Sunnah. If you come on the stream and you're disagreeing with Sunnah as being revelated, we've had two streams on that. You can rewatch that. You can look at the arguments and you can make your own decisions. But this is not this stream. Yeah, this stream is not about talking about Sunnah.
Are you Muslim?
Yeah, Muslim. Yeah.
All right.
He's
Okay.
a Quran only or Sunnah.
Right. I understand now. That's fine.
But thank you anyway, Sam. I think personally the point's proven. The fact that there's disputes over abortion, riba, interest, a whole host of issues demonstrates that you do need specification. You do need some sort of guidance on that. Now, it could be the case that you believe we don't. That's up to you. But then you're going to have differences, and you're going to have people believe that abortion is fine, it's the right, and other people think that they're committing murder and mass murder. So this is a big issue. But I appreciate you coming on, Sam. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, we've got Brother Ali Talib. Assalamu alaikum. Are you there? Ali?
I think I know this brother.
Yeah. Is it, he in the private message he did message us.
Yeah, I know him.
Is it? Is he there, Ali?
From Australia. MashaAllah.
No.
Can't hear him.
Okay. Oh well, we'll keep you there. As in, we'll put you down, but stay on the in the queue, and then inshallah we can try and come back to you later on. Okay, mashallah, we have Brother Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, brother. Can you hear me?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. So from dawah-wise,
it is, yes. Well, no, not really. I was actually passing through, and I noticed your alert came up, and I missed actually the beginning part of the program.
Okay.
But I caught, I think, the last couple of guests, and one thing piqued my interest, which was this idea of morality and how do we know the religion is true? And I get this quite often actually in the discussions that I have, where people sort of say, yes, but does it have to come from somewhere? Can it not just be? Right? Can it come in, big, almost like this sort of I've inherited it kind of a discussion, right? And usually the response that we give, and your brothers have given it, which is that anything that we do, in normal life, we expect it to come from a source that we trust. I mean, for example, your payroll, right? You expect a salary. You don't expect some anonymous individual to pay your salary from wherever you get from wherever or whenever. There's a certain process of protocol that you follow. And what I find when I speak to these people, they throw that logic out the door when it comes to religion. And it's this same sort of ridiculous comedian of I've just let go of one more. I've forgotten 3,000, or I've sort of don't believe in 3,000, and that's just one more. It's the same sort of quip that is meaningless, pointless, and really has no logic behind it. But it's a way of actually denying the truth. And so I think one of the things that I think is worth discussing here is within Islam, morality is not only individual, but it's collective. And that's the most important thing, I think, for what religion gives you, is it gives you a collective responsibility and morality that is good for any time, any place, for all peoples. And a religion that cannot do that, or a way of life that cannot do that, for me, is false by definition.
Yeah. No,
that's really it.
Yeah. I think it's like you make a really good point, Mohammed, because I think that's a really important aspect, because at the beginning of our stream, so normally the way we do our streams, I'm sure you've seen them before, beginning we have a bit of a discussion. So we had a discussion in terms of what the criteria is. Mustasin, alhamdulillah, he's produced like a presentation. It's not been released yet, but he has produced one, so that's why we brought him on the stream. And one of the criteria that we mentioned at the beginning is, or the question we asked at the beginning is, why should we be looking for a religion in the first place?
Right.
And one of the reasons is because we need guidance in our daily lives, not just in our spiritual, but that's really important because part of the fitrah of a human being is to want to worship. Part of it is innate disposition, but also he needs to have guidance in other parts of his life as well to specify some of the complexities of living. Yeah, and so you're going to now look for some sort of worldview that's going to fit within that. Yeah, within that aspect, and so therefore that's what's driving human beings. Yeah, it's not even a religious question, but it's driving all human beings to develop and adopt a belief system. Now, why a religious belief system? Well, that presupposes we've proven that creator exists, that God is one, and therefore we're saying, okay, who's better to give us this guidance than the creator? There are all these people that have made these God claims, yeah, that they've been claimed, from the divine. How can we make that assessment? And so that's why we made one of the criterias is this universal or comprehensiveness, being able to address some of the complexities of life amongst the others. I don't know how much you saw of the beginning of the stream, or
I caught it when Yusuf left. I got it as far as when Yusuf, and then I had to leave. But yeah, so I agree. I think this innate need to worship, I think it is it's without question, it's there. And whether, I mean, the cargo cult example of Richard Feynman, for example, right? Where these individuals during the Second World War, they noticed that cargo was being delivered from the air when these American soldiers were around. These were in the Pacific Islands. It's sort of well documented. And they started actually worshipping this cargo that would come down. Now, when these soldiers left, it wasn't appearing, of course, because it was the delivery for their food and supplies. And they built an entire religion around basically bamboo runways and bamboo telecom towers and coconut headphones. And they sit on these basically dirt roads waiting for these supplies to arrive. Because what they observed was that when these other people did this, they got stuff.
Right.
Okay. Now, to me, that is the perfect example of individuals who innately realize there is something bigger than themselves.
Yeah.
Recognize there is a ritual out here, or what they observe as being a ritual, which gave them something, or that they received something in return, right?
Yeah.
And so without understanding what was happening, they adopted the ritual.
Yeah.
They carried out what they believed was the right actions, but of course nothing happened. But where did that come from? That came from that innate need to want to believe in something bigger than you. And I think anybody that denies this, and I think this is where I think the real, for those on the chat, and I know some of those names because they come onto our channel as well, who say, no, it's not necessary, it's not real, it's whatever. All you're really doing is you're lying to yourself. Again, you're just lying. I mean, you can shout out as loud as you want that this is not real, but all you're doing is lying to yourself, right? And as we say, you're covering your fitra. You're actually forcing it to hide.
What you say, what's not real in terms of the worship instinct?
Yes, the worship instinct. Exactly.
I don't think that's controversial. I think
it's not controversial. That's right. It is generally understood. But I think, Muhammad, you make a really good point, because one of the aspects regards to the tribe that you mentioned is they presumed how to satisfy their religious instinct. Whereas the point here is that we're saying we should be looking for guidance.
That's it. That's the point I was going to make, which is so in the absence of the ability to investigate, they adopted this thing. But actually, what you're saying here is, if you actually went looking, what would you look for? If you actually had to do an assessment. And so I think the tools, I think there was a good question earlier that came up, which is, is not the fact that we have rationality, the fact that we have logic. Is that not evidence? And that's an interesting discussion, right? Which is, why would we be endowed with those qualities in the first place, those attributes in the first place, right?
Yeah.
From the evolutionary perspective, it actually does not provide any necessary benefit above and beyond survival. If all you need is survival,
truth.
All you need is then this is too much. It's far too much. I mean,
Muhammad, I don't know if you know, but there's a professor called Donald Hoffman, who's a professor of neuroscience, and he argued that, and he did a mathematical model of evolution, and he said, does it select for truth finding, or does it select for survivability? And he explained, and he said, actually, truth finding can be antagonistic to survivability. So it's actually survivability, not truth finding. So he said this idea that we can know truth because we are evolved to know truth because it helps us to survive. He said that's a false assumption. It doesn't help us to survive. Survivability helps us to survive, and it doesn't necessitate it being truth. And he gives various examples within nature as well. But he developed a sort of an evolutionary mathematical algorithm in order to test that assumption out. And it's generally sort of acknowledged that that's quite an important, methodology or evidence that he did. Mohammed, are you okay to stick around, inshallah?
I can stick around. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure.
Okay, no problem. Mohammed from Dawah.
It's a bank holiday tomorrow. I got nothing to do today, so
that's all right. That's okay. Because I want to bring on this guest.
Okay.
Nonna. Oh, what's that? No, not me again. Is that what it is? How are you?
Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum salam.
It's called. It's no name again.
No name again.
Yeah, no name again.
Oh, no name again. Sorry, man. Without the space. Okay, yeah.
I want to quickly ask. That question one. The question one that you did last week.
Okay,
2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Will you do more of those? Or?
Yeah, inshallah, we will do. We want to cover specific topics as well, but yeah, we want to maybe also intersperse that with general Q&As, inshallah.
Because that's what because I've got a lot of questions on my mind to ask, so that's why I was asking.
Yeah, no problem, inshallah. That's fine. Also, just something to mention as well. If you have questions that you're trying to seek particular answers to, Yusuf ponders. He runs the Lighthouse Project with Sapiens Institute. I don't know if you heard of that.
Yeah.
Sapiens Institute, yeah. So the Lighthouse Project, you can book a 1 hour session with either Hamza Sources or Abdulrahman, I think, also has been involved in that. I'm not sure if he's still involved because I think he's been busy, but he certainly was one of the sort of the people that are mentors or whatever in that process. Yusuf or others, and so I'm just saying is that it might be easier to get some of those questions there, but obviously you're free to also join us on tap when we have those general Q&A sessions or question on that. I don't know if you've got any particular questions on this topic.
I can't really think of one yet, but how would you expect the Adamic evolution of polytheism, or for example, would you say that the fitra was corrupted, like Satan corrupted it, and that's how they became polytheists? So
yeah. Okay, so I think just from my perspective, what Yusuf's got a really good answer to this point, because in relation to a particular contention. So the contention is that humanity went from polytheism to monotheism. So the history of humanity was that polytheistic, and then suddenly it became monotheistic. Yeah, they became more sophisticated. And Yusuf mentions the point, which is that you as an individual, the first thought that's going to come to your head is going to be the most simplest explanation. Yeah. So if you've got this drive to want to worship, the most simplest explanation would be there's one divine being. Yeah. There's one. You're not going to come out with this whole pantheon of gods and this elaborate story like Zeus and Hercules and whoever it is, or Odin and Thor and all these different demigods and gods and goddesses and all that type of thing. You're not going to come out with that. That might develop later on. Yeah. But the initial thought is one God. And we know, there's various studies that demonstrate that, children, even preschool, they have this innate disposition to want to believe in a God or supernatural agent, that there are historical evidences of, tribes that are cut off from Western civilization that have worshipped one God. So the native tribes of North America, there was a number of tribes that had belief in one God as well, and other areas. So it's not like even to be honest, even things which are perceived as traditionally polytheistic, like Hinduism, actually have at the sort of the core philosophical foundation that actually there is only one God. It's just that, and I'm sure Muhammad can explain further because they've had whole streams about Hindus recently as well, regards to this. So and the other thing, and just one final point before I go to the other brothers, one final point. In a truly monotheistic belief system, you don't depict God. Yeah. So you wouldn't have the archaeological evidence compared to polytheistic religions that have no problems in depicting gods. So if I'm an archaeologist that's looking back into history from 10,000, 5,000 years ago, I'm going to see more evidence for polytheism and anthropomorphic versions of God than a monotheistic, transcendental being, or a necessary being of God. Yeah, I'm going to see more evidence polytheism than that. So, that's not the basis of justifying that. Therefore, history means that we move from polytheism to monotheism. Yeah, Muhammad, I don't know if you've got further points regards to you wanted to add to that.
So, well, I'd like to hear the response of what he thinks of your response, first of all.
Yeah.
So, Mr. No Name again. Yeah.
But could you briefly summarize what you said again?
Okay. Look.
Go on, somebody. Go
Okay. Look, in short statements, what he's saying is, if the evidence historically is that those societies that anthropomorphized and created statues of God would survive, because that's the stuff that survives, right? If you have a society where they believe in a God that is transcendental, that has no images, that cannot be seen, that is not of this time space domain, then obviously there's going to be no evidence for that, because they're not going to depict it ever, right?
Yeah.
So by definition, your archaeology is not going to dig it up. And so I think it's a bit of a loaded question, where it presupposes that archaeological evidence and science, let's call it, scientism, is the source of truth. Because that's essentially what it's saying. You're essentially rigging the question or begging the answer by presupposing certain boundaries of where you're going to get your evidence from.
Okay.
And that's a mistake. I mean, that's not, first of all, it's not objective, and secondly, it's not honest. I mean, it's actually quite a dishonest approach.
Just to add to that,
yeah.
Because someone asked me this, well, I think someone might have asked me this question before. A couple of points to mention, what Sharif mentioned, because naturally, rationally, you start off with one and then you build on to many, rather than starting off with many then one. Dr. Oliver Petridge conducted some studies on children, and she said belief in a non-anthropomorphic God is cognitive natural. And then she says, obviously, atheism is an acquired cognitive position. Based on her studies, she found children believed in one God rather than many gods. And now I've got this. I was looking for this point. Wilhelm Skimmett. I'm not sure if you guys have heard the name. He wrote, I think, 5 to 10 volumes, I think, about this topic, where he literally researches across the globe, like from ancient China to ancient India to all these different previous civilizations, and he actually found the earlier you trace, it starts off with one God and then it evolves to many. So he's actually got his evidences, and those of his opponents actually respected his research and took his research as something that is something strong. I've got it here as something as well. His hypothesis was monotheistic religions had denigrated from monotheistic basic religions. He used anthropomorphic research on Native Americans, Australian Aborigines, and other civilizations to support his theory. And he's got obviously evidence if you read his actual book. He's wrote volumes on that. And then finally, I'd say as well, again, same thing at what you said, Sharif. Like, if you think of it a thought experiment, what Allah says, like, when there's danger, for example, that's about to befall upon you, you're not going to be thinking of 3, 4, 5, 10 gods. You're going to just naturally call out to one God, which shows obviously it's innate to believe in one God rather than many.
Yeah, so I have heard one guy, I think called Speakers Corner UK or something, counteract, I think, against Sabor. This was like 5 years ago. Counteract this statement. Like he referenced this video where he says, Olivia Petrovich, she wasn't like peer reviewed or something. And there was also
Dr. Justin Barrett and Dr. Paul Bloom.
She also referenced this, Daniel Everett.
No, I've not heard.
So she also referenced Daniel Everett, who who claims to meet this tribe called the Piraha, who had no concept of God. But the way I count it, maybe like the children, because they also said that that the language of the Piraha is monolingual, even though that contradicts, because they've been talking. The Piraha know a bit of Portuguese, but that they basically said that the language, it shows that they're less likely to know, complex ideas. Like, for example, they don't know numbers, they don't know colors. They describe it metaphorically, like blood, for example. Yeah.
Who's this? What are you saying?
So no name. So what you're trying to say is that this guy's given one example of a particular tribe that doesn't believe in God, and therefore it can't be innate. Is that what you're saying? Is that what he was?
Yeah, I think that's what he was saying. But I've got some, like, for example, there's Christian, because Everett himself, he was a missionary Christian, and then he converted to atheism, and there was there are other people who conducted searches, because apparently they don't have a creation myth as well. That some guy, I think it's called, I forgot his name, but he basically said there was sorry, I cut off that.
I'm just trying to understand that if that's how far you have to go to the contention to demonstrate that belief in God is not innate, then we say, isn't it? There's a principle: the exception proves the rule. Yeah, because if you have to try to demonstrate an exception, then by definition it's not the norm because it's the exception. Yeah. So if you have to get to that stage in order to demonstrate why one particular tribal whatever from outskirts of whatever believes there's no God, then and yet you've got all this body of evidence of theistic beliefs across the world and across time, then it demonstrates that actually that's the norm. And the norm, he has to be able to account for it. How's he accounting for it? Either evolution or that it's through some sort of innate idea.
Just to bear in mind, a lot of this academic research that's been conducted by Dr. Paul Bloom, these guys are atheists, and they're saying the exact same thing based on their research. Like, religion is natural. I suggest you read that. Think about it. Would you choose a towel? Like, think about it. You've got on one case here, the actual studies are showing, look, belief in a creator is innate. Let's say hundreds of studies to show that, and then you have one here that might be whatever. What are you going to choose? You know, the overwhelming evidence on one hand, or something that's speculative?
Yeah, but there's also like, because I've also digged into the Pura, apparently they do have this recreation myth. Like they have this recreation myth of, I think, like this demiurge. I think they do have some concept, but they also have they also claim to see spirits. Like Daniel Everett himself claimed that the Pura out of nowhere just started to what's it called? Said that there was a spirit out in the desert when he couldn't see it, and there were the spirit was threatening them that if you go into the jungle, they'll be killed, basically. But
so what's the relevance of this point? What are you extracting?
No, he's saying that this is the answer to this guy who were arguing against Sabor, that actually the study didn't look into this in detail because they do have a creation myth and they have some sort of, you know,
Okay, right.
not a creation myth, like maybe a recreation myth, like the demiurge.
Okay.
Like create, like they believe in layers, basically, that the world was like created in layers. Like there's people living in the clouds. There's also, but I think the Piraha is like a part of the the Amazonian. I think
Right.
that also maybe Native American or had like fights against Native Americans as well. The research I've conducted.
Yeah. No. It's a good point that you raise in terms of looking into these details. But I think, like I said, even if I wasn't to look into these particular details, if they're trying to get one particular tribe from the Amazon rainforest to justify that it's not innate, I think it's the opposite. I think it's demonstrating that it's the norm to believe in one God, or believe in God, at least God or gods at least, as the norm, and belief in atheism is not the norm. It doesn't necessarily make it true, belief in God, but it makes it, natural and innate within human beings to believe in God or gods.
Also, I don't think it disproves that children that don't believe in God, maybe it's their language and stuff, and maybe they haven't, like, their culture hasn't learned it, but probably they may have had.
When Oliver Petrie went to Japan and she asked the children, they even said to her, "Why are you doing the experiment? Because we don't have this idea of God." And then when she showed the children natural objects and man-made objects, so distinction, the children said, "God created it in singular, the natural object," and she was shocked. And even the Japanese around were shocked because they said, "We've never taught our children about the concept of God."
Yeah, but I think what No Name is saying about this particular tribe is that maybe the language is limited and not complex, and therefore the ability to articulate their thoughts about the supernatural may not be
just
complex.
one question. How big was this tribe? How many individuals?
It's not that much. I think there's only like they live in the Amazon rainforest, but they don't allow missionaries to go anymore to visit them because they're trying to convert them to Christianity and stuff.
Okay, so I mean, I've just done a quick Google search on this, and there's a very interesting sociological sort of, actually, it's a paper actually, and it says it's around 400 people, and they split off from the main tribe and essentially isolated themselves. Right?
Yeah.
Now, to me, that sounds like self-imposed exile.
Yeah,
and then
that's what I forgot to mention. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so self-imposed exile, and then a degradation in cultural richness because they lost actually a lot of cultural attributes by being isolated. So what you have here actually is not an example of innate belief. You have an example of what happens when people lose culture.
Yeah.
Right? When people actually distance themselves from the group or people they belong to, what happens is they end up losing what they had. And so I think that's really what, I mean, to me, my quick reading, I sort of just quickly scanned the paper. That's what I'm getting. So what I would say, to Sharif's point as well, is wonderful, extreme corner case example, but it definitely in no way is evidence, as far as I'm concerned, that it's the standard default behavior of human beings.
Oh, I think he's gone. He might have left us.
Okay,
Maybe the
what did I
connection-
say? I wasn't being harsh or anything. For sure.
No. He's not Yusuf. Alhamdulillah. But you say it's a good point. Oh, there he is. He's back again. Let me try and grab him back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think fundamentally, so I think this is more of a sociological example of what happens when communities are split and they lose touch with the larger body of the community. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, how would you respond to that?
There's no response, but I also want to tell you that I've seen the documentary of Everett. The Pira had said that they also don't want to believe in God, so they basically just reject it. So because they don't really understand it that much, and
that's fine.
Yeah, like for example, that Daniel Everett tries to claim them as the ultimate imperialist, but I don't think that's the truth, because they do learn about testimony, like other people's experiences, and then they claim that to be true. So, for example, they deny Jesus because for example, Daniel Everett claims that they deny Jesus because Everett never saw Jesus. So they basically just say, we don't believe in Jesus because you haven't seen him or anything like it, for example.
Right. Okay. Look. So I would just add again. I think. So historically, I mean, Amazon tribes have been known to be very protective, and they disallow outsiders in general. Anyway, they're very. I mean, you've got to understand as well. A tribe that's been isolated is going to be suspicious when somebody comes in, right? And especially somebody that doesn't look like them. And then the last thing they want, however primitive it is, there is at least some kind of a communal system that they've got. And the last thing they want is for that communal system to be disrupted, because that's all they know, right? So it's understandable they would, I think, refute Everett or disagree with him. But again, as I'm saying, like I said before, I think this is more a question of somebody trying to force a certain conclusion onto a scenario that, in my mind, is actually a very unique scenario, and it's a historical happenstance, right? It's something that I think is very, very unique in and of itself. So yeah, I mean, let's leave it there. I think it's a great example. I mean, I've never heard of it before, but I don't think it actually proves anything either way.
Okay.
I don't know if you got any final questions or points that you want to raise. It's just the reason why I'm saying that is because we don't have any other guests, so you might be our last guest.
Okay. Final comments is basically when we do the inshallah, when you do the Q&A, I would like to ask you about, for example, science, consciousness. Like, I have lots of questions about these things, and basically I have a lot of questions. Basically, that's all I had to conclude. But
no problem. Jazakallah.
Sure.
Okay.
Sorry, Muhammad, you're going to say something? Sorry.
No. I think that's fine. Yeah. I mean, you can ask away. I mean, ask as many questions as you want. But
I think maybe for another
stream, another time, and then next time do the Q&A.
Absolutely. Inshallah.
Okay. No name.
I
don't like calling you no name, but that's your name. Okay, Jazakallah khair. So inshallah, hopefully we'll see you again in the future streams. So we I don't know, nobody's at the moment, nobody's coming up.
They're clearly far too shy today. I mean,
maybe.
Come on. What
you know what it is, Mohammed? I think people don't understand the power of this argument or the power of this discussion. I don't mean to be like over exaggerating, because people think, what's that? Yeah, because the point here is whenever I discuss with a non-Muslim and I've got him to agree that a creator exists, then I follow this pattern. And this pattern, if the guy's sincere, he ends up basically, being convinced of Islam, inshallah. So I see this as a really strong argument, because
it is. I mean, I followed it myself, with several discussions, and I think anybody that either you deny your own logic, or you deny necessary consequences of the arguments that you're placing. And both of those are imposter. You're being an imposter to yourself. So I think the bottom line here is, for this discussion, is if you're truly looking for a religion, then it's not, do I have a fuzzy feeling about whether something out there is right, and if it is, then I remember it's quite interesting. I remember back at uni days, just after, I was talking to somebody, and they said, he went off and joined some cult anyway, and whatever, I don't know. And I think he joined because he said, "Oh, I like the food they were cooking."
Right.
And that was it. I mean, that was his whole sort of. And he said, and he said all the rituals and everything came with it, right? But I just really liked the food, and I said, "That's it." I mean, that's the only reason you changed your religion, because you like the food, and really, it was as. I mean, it's so silly that you think, could somebody actually use that as a conversion mechanism? And it is, if you believe, and I think your opening statement, that's the only bit I caught, is if you believe religion has no evidence. If you fundamentally believe that there is no objective criteria with which to ascertain the truthfulness of a religious claim, then the next best thing you've got is personal whims and desires.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so one of the myths that we have to blow here, and really sort of blow out of the water completely, is Islam is the only religion on the planet that actually says not only is it preserved, but it has very good reason and evidence for why it's the truth.
Yeah.
And no other religion actually makes that claim, by the way. You know
it is, Muhammad. So we got Jawad that is good. We're going to add to the stream, inshallah. But just before that, it is, Muhammad. I've had these discussions with non-Muslims, and you go through the discussion. I remember being at Speaker's Corner a few years ago. It's going a few years ago, and I was having this discussion with him about first about belief in a creator, and he agreed, and then I went to the Quran. I think with the discussion about Islam is that although you can prove the creator exists a priori, basically without investigating the claims initially, obviously you have to think through the arguments. But with the Quran and about talking about linguistic miracles or prophecies and these types of things, then they require prior knowledge. They require a research. Yeah. So, he seemed impressed. He seemed to understand. He had contentions. Yeah. And I said to him, I said, look, irrespective of whether you agree at this moment in time or not, that's not the point. What I want you to understand is that Muslims make a claim for an objective criteria.
Absolutely right. And nobody else does. And nobody else does.
Yeah. That's
right. And to many of the non-believers out there, I think it's very important to appreciate that we don't make these claims whimsically. Right? This is built into the revelation, the Quran. These claims are built into the revelation. So it's not something we've come up with afterwards. And 4 centuries later, after several councils or whatever, this is actually built. So, and this is one of the things for me, the criteria is if you think God has revealed something, then God will tell you why it's been revealed, what its purpose is, and how to tell truth from falsehood. He would, because we have those capabilities. We have rationality, or seeking truthfulness is a desire that we have. Staying away from sort of abhorrent actions is something that's inherent in people. Now, everything else can be taught, but most people know that certain things are wrong, certain things are right, and there is a certain level of wrong and rightness that you can arrive at innately. Anyway, Brother Jawad, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Walaikum salam. I don't want to fanboy too much, but I love you too, Muhammad and Sharif. So it's nice to see you both together. What a combo. I think I'd have a fit if Dr. Imran from Dawa joined as well. Then I'd just be out of it completely.
Watch our stream tomorrow, inshallah.
Inshallah. Yeah.
Okay.
We need
Okay.
to invite him
We'll
on
have a Dawah
the
stream tomorrow.
to our
Yeah,
streams in Tap. But we weren't planning, to be honest. To be fair, we weren't planning Muhammad to come on, but he came on. I thought, right, that's it.
Nice surprise. Yeah.
He kept me now. Okay, it's fine.
And I think it's a lot to do with it. A side point to why I came on, but I think it's a lot to do with the fact that you guys have a really good way of speaking and simplifying complicated issues to laymen like us to understand, and you identify some profound points in all the technical jargon. In the last couple of points, Muhammad, that you made, for example, amazing, new information to me, and it really kind of mind blowing as well. Like that, Islam is the only religion that makes the claim that it's got objective reasons to come. Yeah, evidence there. I mean, it's something that we kind of know, but we don't know how to articulate.
Yes.
So.
Yes. No, this is so. Let me just stop you there. So first of all, Jazakallah khairan, and make dua that we maintain our Islam, and we are successful in this endeavor that we're doing. And again, we can't do it without you, brothers and sisters out there. By the way, we're just normal people like you, and we're just conveying the little that we know. That's all it is. What I would say to this is sometimes, and I went through this journey myself, is being born into Islam, you actually don't realize its power. You don't realize its strength. You don't appreciate how much of a safety net and how much of a comfort blanket you have that you're born into. I mean, pretty much everything is given to you. I mean, and it's only when you step outside, or you're taken outside in perspective, and you look at what other people are doing to find their meaning in life and their purpose, that you suddenly say, wow, why are you doing that? I mean, why are you climbing to the top of mountains and spending time, years in jungles to discover the truth when it's actually here? And I think that's part of the reason, which is, I think, to really understand Islam, you really have to just sort of say, what would it take for and again, only when you interact with people who've converted, you actually get this, right? Because the people who convert, when they come in, the first thing they say, and you see it when they do the shahada, the first thing they tell you is, it's like a weight has lifted off my shoulder. That's how they feel. Like they feel this sort of openness of the chest, and this sort of letting go of sort of this sort of pressure that they were under. Right. I mean, that's sort of how they explain it. And it's the feeling of, when you, I don't know whether you've ever done like sort of mountain climbing, or whether you've been abseiling or things, right? Because I used to do abseiling like years ago. And, as you're coming down the face of the cliff and you're on free fall, you need to sort of, either you got your partner at the top that can hold you, or you got to hold yourself, right? And when you land at the bottom, boom, you sort of go, ah, because you're safe now, right? And that's Islam. Everybody else, they're floating around out there. They're waiting for that, and they never get it. And imagine you're waiting for that foundation, and it never arrives. Your feet are that, sort of clinging on this. That to me is, in my mind, the mental picture that I have of people who are searching. They think they're on the right path, but they're never going to land. And when you give them Islam, their feet hits ground, and they go, wow, so this is what truth feels like. This is what certainty feels like. Because they've never had it before.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think also, like, to add to your comment about born Muslims, that we hear a lot about the basics of Islam very early on, and our brains aren't developed enough to really understand the implications of them. And we don't take the time to revisit those points when we are a bit older, a bit wiser, have a bit more capacity to think deeper into things. We don't actually revisit those points and and think about how it applies to us in different ways. And I think like the points that you bring out, even like then, kind of help us born Muslims revisit those points. So Jazakallah khair for that. Yeah.
Inshallah.
I think
these streams will help, inshallah.
Yeah. I think, like I said, you make a very good point, Riyad, which is that obviously we are taught these things as born Muslims, and we don't really appreciate them. And there has to be a process of going back as adults in order to try to appreciate, particularly the foundations of why we're Muslim. And for me, alhamdulillah, I was able to go to various Islamic study circles when I was young. That helped me through this logical progression when it comes to the basis of belief. I think that's it's quite important. Just like I said, I think we touched upon and we discussed with Mustasin earlier about the criteria of preservation and how Islam, when it looks at the criteria, if we assess the criteria of preservation, when we look at Islam in that criteria, it's 4 areas. You've got textual preservation in its written form. You've got the oral memorization as well. You've got the preservation of the language. So the Arabic Fushat language was preserved, not just in word meaning, but also grammar, morphology, and balagha, like idioms of language. And you've got preservation of the phonetics of how to pronounce the letters. Yeah. So now you apply that to any other religion out there, you don't have that. Yeah. And that's a very powerful, view. And in the same way, in terms of the external criteria evidence, like the objective evidence for Islam, which other religion has that? Yeah, which other religion claims, irrespective of whether a person assesses it to be true or false, as a separate discussion, how to prove these things were preserved. But the fact that Islam claims these things, or at least Muslims claim that there's a clear preservation of its text and the language that goes with the meaning of that text. So, it's a very powerful argument and point. And I think, there are going to be points and steps that we're not going to have all knowledge of. So I'm not going to have all the knowledge of the manuscript evidence that justifies that, 95 or over 95% of the Quran was preserved, or that we have the manuscript evidence, today from the 1st century, preserved first. But at the very least, if I'm making an assessment, one religion, we don't know who wrote the books. One religion, we do know who wrote the books. Which one would I assume to be more correct? It's going to be the one where we know who were the scribes at the very least, or the method of preservation. Whereas the other one, we don't even know who actually wrote it. Yeah. So so I think there's a few things that we can take, in terms of understanding from this. And I think this is what I tend to do is when I discuss this with non-Muslims in the Dawah, is that I try to explain to them what the type of claim Muslims are giving on these issues. Yeah. Jawad, I don't know if you've got any final comments or questions that you want to raise. Sorry.
Yeah, I actually didn't. We kept talking about things. So the point that came on to ask about was the earlier we were discussing, or you guys were discussing the idea that survivability is more important for the evolutionary process than truth, and I wanted to ask you guys to explore a bit more the implications of that. Like, so what? I was interacting in the chat earlier on and saw Ehsan respond saying truth and survivability are related. So what do you guys say to that?
So what I'm quoting, paraphrasing, if you want to say, or summarizing, is a research done by Professor Donald Hoffman. So he made this research on this particular topic area. So he was just demonstrating that there's not a necessary link between survivability and truth. Yeah. And he gives various analogies about how, as human beings, do we actually see the truth of the matter, or do we see a representation? of what's really going on. Yeah, so we don't actually know. And Immanuel Kant, famously talked about this issue, which is about, as human beings, we have phenomena, what we see, what we comprehend, but there's noumena. Noumena is reality as it is. So there's reality as we perceive it, and there's reality as it is. And so Donald Hoffman, he gives like the analogy of Windows on your computer. So when you drag the icon of a document into the bin, and you see it go into the bin, he goes, that's just a representation of reality. That's not reality. Reality is what's occurring in terms of the circuitry. But what you're seeing is just simply a representation, and so that representation is not the truth of the reality. It's just a perception of what's occurring. So Donald Hoffman basically, he just demonstrates that he basically develops an algorithm, a mathematical algorithm, which puts through the computer to demonstrate that in evolution tends to select for survivability as opposed to truth finding. The implication of that is, can we trust our truth bearing capacity? Can we actually know what truth is? Now, you have two problems here. You have like a skeptical problem. So this is this idea that if you based our rationality upon materialism and evolution, then we cannot ground truth. So you have this problem that we can never know what's right or wrong. And then you've got another problem, which is, or not another problem, but another angle to this, which is say, well, actually, intuitively, I do believe there are truths. So I'm what they term a realist about truth. True propositions do exist. Now, if true propositions do exist, how do I ground that truth? It cannot be through evolution, because that selects for survivability and does not necessarily select for truth-bearing capacities. And we can never know, actually. That's the other problem. We can never know whether survivability and truth are correspondent to each other. We just know that it's survivability. So therefore, if we're realist about truth, meaning we believe that true propositions really exist outside of our minds, then the way to ground it would be a transcendental being. A necessary mind type of thing. That's what they would argue. So this would be like a transcendental argument for the existence of God. So obviously the premise of the argument is built upon an intuition. The intuition is that we do have truths and we can be rational. Now, if that intuition is true, and I'm sure people like Hassan would want that intuition to be true, then the pattern of the argument would assume, therefore, some sort of transcendental necessary being in order to ground our ability to know truths. So that would be the general argument for that. I think we're going to have separate streams where we go into more detail about transcendental arguments for the existence of God, because it's not just one, there's various arguments for it.
So we can't ground truth unless we have a transcendental being to objectify.
So the argument would be is, if we say that we can know that there are true propositions, we can know those true propositions. The only way that we can know those true propositions is if we can if from a materialist point of view, is to assume that evolution selects the ability to know what true propositions are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we
can never know that,
and we know that the evolutionary process doesn't do that. It selects the survivability.
Even if, this is the point, even if we didn't have Professor Donald Hoffman's research on this area, so even if we did leave that to the side and we say, okay, we just have evolution, and therefore the ability for human beings to determine the ideas that they have evolved, there's no way of saying that evolutionary process could have established truth, because you have to step outside your mind
to measure it.
Mind is knowing the truth.
You
can't do that. And that's why they talk about externalist or extrinsic view of knowledge. An extrinsic view of knowledge is say that knowledge, which may be defined as what corresponds to reality, or the person believes that this corresponds to reality, or justified true belief is another way of saying it. So if a person believes that you can have knowledge, justified true beliefs, he's either going to be in internalist or intrinsic, meaning that it comes from himself and the material form that he's made up of, but then he's got a problem. How do you know? Because you have to step outside your mind to be able to make that assessment, but you can't do that. Or you're externalist, which means that it's actually given to us. Yeah. And so therefore you have to invoke some sort of, through an abductive way, best explanation, that there must be some sort of necessary being with the ability to make rational judgments, to give us the ability to make a rational judgment.
I just got a quick question about that. So in terms of like mathematics, let's take, for example, 2 + 2 is 4. Obviously, if all human beings were wiped out, that will still remain true, meaning the truth of that statement is not dependent on our mind. It exists externally to our minds. So even if the physical world tomorrow was to vanish, 2 + 2 would still necessarily be 4. And even if we all were to vanish, it will still remain true, which means its truthfulness is not grounded in our minds. It must be external. What do you think of that point?
Yeah. So that's another.
Adjud mentions this. That's what I'm trying to say.
That's another.
They're discovered rather than invented, basically. Mathematics, logic, these things are discovered rather than invented from the human mind.
So there's different arguments when it comes to the transcendental argument for the existence of God. So that's one argument that I mentioned, which is that if we believe that we can be rational, then how do you ground that rationality? And we're realist about that. So there are true propositions, and we can know those true propositions. How do we determine that? Then you'd need sort of an externalist explanation for that. The other argument is say that, okay, there are these necessary facts. Yeah, these necessary truths. Now, these necessary truths, they have mental content. Yeah, they're sort of about something, aren't they? So when you talk about 2 + 2 = 4, or when you talk about law of non-contradiction, all of these things, they're an idea. Yeah. So the truth bearer is this idea. It's not. So when I say, if I say, for example, and this is like the classic example that's used in this argument, the grass is green. I can say the grass is green in English, in French, in Urdu, in Arabic, whatever language. But what contains the truth transcends the particular language that I'm using.
Yes.
Because it's not just the language I'm using that makes it the truth bearer. It's something external to language, because it can mean, I could do it in binary code to say the grass is green, or Morse code, or whatever. Yeah. So the truth bearer is this mental content. Yeah. Now, if it's a mental content, then what grounds that mental content? And so people would generally say, not people, some philosophers argue, I think it's James Anderson's written a paper on this, and he argues that the truth of the mental content needs to be grounded in a necessary mind. And he uses this as like a transcendental argument for the existence of God. And he's had debates with Alex Malpass on this particular issue. Yeah. Sorry, Jawad, we've gone on a little bit. I don't know if there's any further points that you wanted to ask.
Fantastic stuff. Thanks for clearing that up. Like a reminder for myself and others as well. But yeah, that's it for me. Thanks, guys.
No problem, Jazakallah. I appreciate you coming.
Walaikum salam.
So inshallah, we've got no more guests now. So that's good, alhamdulillah. So we can finish early. No, alhamdulillah, we have been going on for 2 hours 40 minutes. So it has flown by, alhamdulillah. So inshallah, appreciate you coming on, Muhammad. I don't know if you
surprise guest.
Words, surprise guest. That's right.
No. I actually, first time I've seen Brother Muhtasin. I've seen your name on various chats and things. So alhamdulillah, it's great to meet you, or virtually meet you. No, I think, as Brother Jawad said, I think this is one of the most underrated discussions and underrated points that we never talk about. And I think we need to make this more and more. You talked about Mormons earlier. I saw her mention them. I think Brother Mansour had a discussion at Speaker's Corner last week or the week before, or this week, I don't remember when. And it was quite interesting. He had exactly the same discussion. He said, look, why do you believe what you believe? Give me your evidence. And then he said, well, let me tell you about Islam. And the moment he mentioned Islam has objective evidence, the guy says, you mean to say religion can actually be proved?
Mm.
You mean to say there is objective evidence out there? And I said, yes. I mean, why would there not be? And just that state, I mean, you need to stop there, because you've just blown the guy's brain, right? You've just taken away an entire pedestal of his worldview where he viewed reality. I mean, talking about truth and reality and truth seeking and so on, where he thought all he had to do was just trust his feelings. And that was enough. And then he comes across another community, another person that probably he would never have interacted with, that says, actually, the way you believe is inadequate. And that's the key thing. It's not that believing is wrong. I mean, we know nobody can force you to believe. Nobody can force you to not believe. But the methodology by which you arrive at belief is faulty and inadequate. Let us show you a better one. And this, I think, needs to be said more loudly, and we need to actually make it clear, actually, in our streams, that this is what we're about.
Yeah. I mean, Muhammad as well. I think the point being about the topic today, obviously, is about rational filters.
Right.
How
Right.
do
Of
we
course.
filter?
Yeah.
No. But what you're saying is absolutely perfectly correct. But I think what sometimes people think is, even in the Dawah I'm talking about, is I have to be like a alim of every religion I talk to. Yeah.
No.
And the
I
point
agree.
here is
Yes.
this: is that if you understand the rational filters, you've already got a criteria. Yeah.
Perfect.
As a Muslim,
Yes.
you've already
Yes.
got a criteria in your head to be able, even if you have very little knowledge of what they're saying, to be able to understand and analyze what they're saying and make them understand what you're saying as well. Yeah. So it's really important that guys that want to engage in this, not just for themselves in order to understand, but also to engage these types of discussions, this rational filter discussion is really important. I think Mustafa, remember when we had that discussion with the Mormons as well?
Yeah, in the mosque.
Remember the first discussion we had with them, where we just talked about belief in a creator, isn't it? Why is the creator necessary?
Yeah, I remember that.
One. Yeah.
Yes.
All we did was we did a bit of research about Mormonism. We found out they believe that God is basically a limited type creature, or a contingent being, basically lives on the planet.
They get to become they get to become God, right?
That's right. Exactly. So there's a lot of
they get to run their own universe, by the way. Right?
Exactly.
You know that, right?
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird. It's crazy. I mean, I spent a long time looking into this as well.
So that's the point. Now, I don't need to go into the debate about what does the Book of Mormon say. I don't need to, because this goes back to what we also in the beginning we talked about the incorrect criteria. Because I could have said to him, "Oh, how ridiculous! You believed that you saw an angel." Yeah, but that's not a right criteria. Yeah, because that doesn't make it true or false. Yeah, it's a logically possible thing that an angel came. What makes it true or false is something else. Yeah, so it's not the plausibility, implausibility of the claim that we're going to use. So me and Mustasin, we just talked to them about their God claim. Yeah.
Yes.
Try to make
so actually, that's actually a very powerful statement. I don't want to miss it, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us there's many, many things in the unseen, right? And of those, he's only described to us a few, very, very few. So therefore, if we go down the road of, something is ridiculous or whatever, then actually no, because there are many, many unseen things that we have no idea about.
Yes,
right? So this doesn't make it true or false just because somebody puts an unseen argument of incredulity. Right, wherever they come from. This is not a position, but I think you're right. I think often those tactics by the other side are used to almost like a diversionary tactic. They used to divert away from the main discussion because they know instinctively, intuitively, or with knowledge, that they cannot argue their position on God.
Yeah.
And so therefore, let's go to the side points, or let's attack something else, or let's discuss something else, because I know the core of it I can't actually discuss. Well, the key to Islam is we start with Allah, right? And that's how you should finish the discussion as well, is do you have a correct understanding? If you don't, then everything else is peripheral and actually pointless.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Mohammed, any news on Dawah-wise? Any channel?
Yes, so we have a stream tomorrow, inshallah. And it's going to be interesting. I mean, it's open Q&A, but we're really sort of moving into, I think, developing more frequent programs moving forward, and maybe more on Hinduism as well. So Brother Hashim is focusing on that. So we'll go. So alhamdulillah, thank you very much for allowing me to stay on. It's been very pleasurable. Jazakallah khairan.
No problem. Take care. So Muhammad, I'll see you soon, inshallah.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Mustasin.
Right.
Any final thoughts? Oh, before you do your final thoughts, I just need to do this. I need to Jazakallah khair to Musfiqar Kashim, who became a YouTube member to our channel. Appreciate that. And also Jazakallah khair for the super chat from Dawah Dude, who wrote, Alhamdulillah, Brother Khalil is now destroying atheists left and right. He was convinced here on tap. Khalil, alhamdulillah, Khalil Allah. You also used to be known as Justin. So Jazakallah khair for the support. And we make dua that we strengthen our channel and also strengthen his channel and himself, inshallah, and give him the best in this life and in the hereafter. I mean. So I don't know if you've got any. We've got somebody that's just come on, Masih Muslim. What's that?
What does that mean?
I don't know, Messiah Muslim.
I've got about 10 minutes left.
Okay, we'll quickly put you on really quickly. We were going to end, but we just quickly put you on.
10 minutes.
Are you Muslims for Jesus? Brother, we're already for Jesus.
Well, I am a Masihi Muslim because the Quran says that whoever follows Jesus will be superior in the sight of Allah Ta'ala. So that makes me a Masihi Muslim.
Okay,
because I do.
But all Muslims believe that we are for Jesus. We love Jesus, alayhi salam. What makes your point different? Are you a Christian?
I think the thing is, we should keep it to the topic.
I know, but I want to use this as an evidencing point.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah. So go on. Are you Christian or do you believe in Trinity?
I'm a Masihi Muslim, a Muslim who follows Hazrat Isa.
Yeah, but what does that mean? Do you believe that Jesus is God, the Son of God?
Oh, that is the biggest blunder Christianity has done, taking Jesus to be God.
Okay.
No.
So you don't believe that?
No, I don't believe. I do believe that he is the source of God's compassion and mercy, because the Quran says, whoever follows Jesus, Allah Ta'ala is going to fill their hearts with compassion and mercy. So it's not.
Wait. Where does it say that?
Yeah,
can you just quote the verse? Let's see which chapter verse.
Surah 57, verse 27.
Oh, my keyboard doesn't. Get it up, Sharif. See what the actual ayah says.
And then we sent after them our messengers, and we sent Isa, son of Mary, and gave him the Injil, and we ordained in the hearts of those who followed him compassion and mercy. But the monasticism which they invented for themselves, we did not prescribe for them, but they sought it only to please Allah therewith. But that they did not observe it with the right observance. So we gave those among them who believed their due reward, but many of them are fasiqun, rebellious, disobedient to Allah. Yeah.
So did you get it? Does the verse say that or not?
No, the verse says, well, before we go into the verse,
ordained in the hearts of those who followed him compassion and mercy.
Yeah,
does it
it's
say
talking about the past tense. Don't worry. It's a
follow. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
But don't worry. But I'm irrespective of that. What I'm trying to understand is how do you follow? How? Where's like the material to follow Jesus alayhi salam?
Well, why does the Quran instruct us to follow Hazrat Isa if there's no material? May I ask you why?
So where I'm asking you, where is this material?
There got to be some material somewhere. Do you know where it is?
I'm asking you. You're the one that's making the claim.
Well, the claim I'm making is the Quran says, and this is a very important verse. There's nothing to laugh about.
No, I'm
says
not. I'm not.
God-
I'm asking you the question again. Where is it that
No,
we
the
can?
other
How
guy
is it that we know to follow
he's
Jesus?
like laughing. Like it says, God ordained in the hearts of those who followed Jesus' compassion and mercy. Right?
Okay,
Yeah,
so
but
what
again, I'm asking again.
Let me
Where
complete.
do you
Let me
follow
complete.
Jesus?
Let me
Go
complete.
on.
Now,
Yeah.
once a person's heart is filled with compassion and mercy, and that is through following Hazrat Isa,
Right.
he will become a positive force for humanity. And Surah 3 says 55. All those who follow Jesus, because you said this is in the past. Now, Surah 355 says,
You say that's not my question. My question is very
One sec.
specific. Please answer. Please address the question if you can. How do we follow Jesus? What's the material that we look for?
Basically, this is what the Quran says. Follow him. So the material is there in the Quran itself.
So it's the Quran you're saying. So we follow the Quran in order to know how to follow Jesus.
Yes, that's of course one methodology. You can also say, okay, because Allah Ta'ala is instructing Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in Surah Yunus, when in doubt as to what needs to be done, go and look at the scriptures of the old, which is the Torah and the Injil. So basically,
So you're saying you go to the New Testament as well?
New and the Old Testament, because God does not start with the Quran, and because prior to that, God is authenticating other books too. Okay, there has been things done to the old corruption and all that stuff.
So there is corruption. You believe that there was corruption to the Old Testament and New Testament?
Of course, you see, there has been, because nothing has come down in written form from heaven.
Just to mention, the verse doesn't say when you're in doubt. It says if you're in doubt. So it's conditional. So we should quote the ayah properly first.
Okay, let's say when in doubt or if in doubt. So basically, because it says when in doubt, how to follow him.
No, it doesn't say when in doubt.
Okay, let's say if in doubt, how to follow him. Let's say if in doubt, when to follow him, go and look at the scriptures of the past. Now,
just so I'm trying to be clear, yeah. So we agree that we follow the Quran. Obviously, we agree with that. We agree that the story of Isa alayhi salam is not told in detail in the Quran. You agree with that, don't you? How he prayed, how he fasted. Those are not details that are explicated within the Quran itself.
Yeah, basically, it's not there in the Quran. But
So next thing is you're saying, well, we go to the New Testament, but the New Testament's been corrupted, as you agreed as well, didn't you?
The New Testament has been corrupted, of course. I'm saying because.
Okay. So how do you now ensure that what you now follow within the New Testament is not the uncorrupted part?
Because it should jive with what Allah Ta'ala is saying in the Quran.
Right.
And if it doesn't
jive, but this is the point. The problem is that if the Quran is generally silent on a large part of Isa alayhi salam's prophethood, then on what basis can we now justify those areas where the Quran is silent upon, to know that actually is what Jesus said and did?
You see, again, the key point is whoever follows Jesus, his heart will be filled with compassion and mercy. Now, nowhere does the Quran says if you pray 5 times a day, your heart will be filled with compassion and mercy. Nor does it say other stuff. It says whoever follows Jesus. So how do you follow Jesus? You have to look at the scriptures of the past, as Surah Yunus says. Now,
but you see the problem that I have, Messi. the problem that I have is that we both agree it's corrupted. We
No,
both
1 minute.
agree when it's in accordance with the Quran, it's true. So if there's stories which are in accordance with the Quran and the Quran affirms it, then we can affirm it to be like part of revelation. But if they are not affirmed, then we're going to have a problem in terms of being able to verify whether it's true or not. Yeah. But Masih, look, I apologize about this. I'm going to have to go.
One question. You see, if not affirmed, but what we have to see, what is affirmed. So if it's affirmed, that means we follow it. Whether it's we do have, God has given us the ability to see what is corrupted and what's not corrupted.
Yeah.
Right now, taking Jesus to be God is corrupted.
Yeah. So I will answer that question, but we're going to have to go there. So, and I think it's a slightly separate topic that we're going to have anyway. But appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much. And maybe we can have a discussion on the next stream. Honestly, we're going to have to go. Apologies. Yeah. So,
just 1 minute, because the gentleman said that the
topic. 1 minute. Not 1 minute. We're going to have to go. I really do apologize.
You don't want to talk the topic?
We're about to close the stream anyway.
Okay,
so you
fair
can
enough,
come in 2 weeks' time, and you can engage the heart's content if you come on early within the stream. Okay,
could you please do me a favor when you go and study these scriptures which I've given you, so that next time we come, you have an answer. Okay.
I already given you the answer, but that's fine. Yeah. Okay then. Thank you. Bye.
Okay.
Right. Okay then. Yeah. So I think Masih was. We're gonna have to end, but I think the problem that Masih's got is that he's trying to affirm the scripture of the New Testament while affirming that it's corrupted, and agreeing that what is in line with the Quran is acceptable. But then what we have very little details about the specific actions and events at the time of Isa alayhi salam. So the only thing that we have is an unverified document, which is the New Testament. It could be correct, it could not be correct. And the Mufassirin generally, when they looked at like the previous scriptures, they classified their verses into 3 areas. That which agrees with the Quran would be acceptable. That which disagrees with the Quran would be rejected. And that which neither the Quran agrees nor disagrees with, the Muslims would remain silent as to whether it was part of revelation or not. So that's a general approach that we take on this particular issue.
Yeah, just a side point as well, because a lot of Christians say that the Quran affirms, the Bible, but the Quran doesn't affirm the crucifixion. It doesn't affirm Jesus being the Son of God. It pretty much contradicts every aspect of your main theology. So how can the Quran affirm the New Testament when it contradicts the New Testament at a fundamental level? And Ibn Abbas, when he his tafsir of Surah Baqarah, ayah 79, about woe to those who write the books with their own hands and say this is from Allah, he understood that to mean the previous scriptures of the Christians and Jews. So just thought I'd mention that.
Jazakallah. We'll have a whole stream on these types of topic areas later on, inshallah. But Jazakallah khair, Mustahsin. For those of you that came a little bit late, I recommend you to listen to the first part of the show where we go through the rational filters, where we discuss this topic area in more depth, where we talk about rational filters and we go through the various criterias and how important these criterias are, not just as a Muslim, but even generally as a human being, in order to have them. But Jazakallah khair, Mustahsin. Hopefully, inshallah, we will see you soon. Appreciate you coming on, and we need to maybe produce the more detailed version of your presentation or get it out there in the public, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah. And the unique aspects of Quran as well. We've got a presentation on that as well.
Will, yeah, definitely, inshallah. We're going to have a whole stream on that on the Quran, about the Quran as well. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum. You want to say?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Okay, inshallah, brothers and audience members, I'm going to go. Hopefully, inshallah, I'm going to do this, ending the stream in the right way. Normally, I do it in a bad way, but inshallah, I'll do it correctly. Jazakallah for listening. Remember to like, share, subscribe. And hopefully, inshallah, we'll see you guys in the next couple of weeks. We're actually going to release a video, really good video, this probably Thursday. It's actually a debate where Abdulrahman, he gets properly grilled on the issue of philosophy by Muslims who believe philosophy is haram. So check that out. Inshallah, that'll be taking place in the next couple of. That'll be released in the next couple of days. It was I love the discussion. I love it when Abdulrahman gets grilled anyway. But no, it was really good. So please check that out. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.